This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for August 25th, 2020, 10 a.m. session. There'll be no public testimony during the review session. The first item is 2019-198, 40-17 28th Avenue, Queens.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. I find this case interesting with respect to what we do at the BSA, because we often at the BSA are confronted with requests for parking garages and parking area special permits where the garages and lots are designed without adequate reservoir space or with questionable maneuverability and under fire department objection. And the board struggles to persuade the applicant to improve the conditions in the interest of public safety, both on the interior of the garage or lot and on the sidewalk and streets. So I sympathize with DOB's struggle to do the same. And I also question why the developer of this building has chosen to challenge rather than comply with DOB's directions aimed at improving their project and making for a much safer solution. There's been no statement by the appellant to support this position. And after 3 years, no permits have been issued for any construction, and the site is just a vacant lot, right? The question presented appears to be, are reservoir spaces required for a 150 space public parking garage that contains required accessory parking spaces, 48 to general public. So on the first level, I'm persuaded by DOB's carefully reasoned beginnings. This is both a public and an accessory parking garage. So section 36-57 states that, quote, permitted or required accessory parking spaces may be provided in a public parking garage, but only on the same zoning lot as the building or use to which such spaces are accessory, and subject to all the other applicable regulations of this chapter. Since it says all, therefore section 36-521 applies. 36-521 requires 300 square feet per parking space or 200 square feet per space, quote, where the layout and design of the parking area are adequate to permit convenient access and maneuvering in accordance with regulations promulgated by the commissioner, or where, excuse me, or where the developer certifies that such spaces will be fully attended, unquote. Before addressing this issue, I just want to cover the enclosure and screening questions. There, I agree with DOB that the zoning resolution directs that under section 32-41 and 412, all uses must be fully enclosed. Hence, no portion of the use group 8 parking garage or accessory parking structure may be located outside of the enclosure. This is not a hybrid parking lot come parking garage, as is posited by the appellant. Further, whether a parking lot or a parking garage, section 32-17.c requires screening of open off-street parking areas with 10 spaces or more when located adjacent to residence districts. So the so-called reservoir spaces would not be permitted in the proposed locations without the screening, even if it was permitted to be this sort of hybrid of outdoor and indoor lot garage. Section 36-521, which is the main subject of the appeal, it has been around with the same language since 1961. And the text is very clear that with respect to the zoning resolution and the DOB's enforcement of it, there's an option to provide the 300 square feet per parking space or to comply with one of the two options that would permit 200 square foot space if either the applicant demonstrates adequate space to, quote, permit convenient access and maneuvering, or certifies that the spaces will be fully attended at all times. So I don't think once you see the or, it's a choice. But the question for me in this case is, does DOB have the authority to require extra precautions in the interest of public safety? DOB executive level staff is made up of architects and engineers with decades of experience and decades of participation with DOT, fire department, and the mayor's office in endeavoring to make the city safe in all respects, and traffic is, and pedestrian safety is certainly among its many views. Appellants of the zoning resolution suggests that DOB should not be using any of that expertise to determine whether a building design will pose a danger to occupants and the surrounding community. To suggest that, for example, the 200 square foot area allocated to the parking space can be allocated in any way at all without DOB scrutiny deprives that agency of its oversight authority. Section 646 of the city charter gives the DOB commissioner broad powers in the interest of public safety. It says, and the city charter says, conduct of investigations. The commissioner shall have the power and duty to conduct such inquiries as may assist him in the performance of the functions of the department where the public safety is involved, and for such purpose he shall have subpoena power to compel the attendance of witnesses, to administer oaths, examine witnesses, and compel the production of books, papers, and documents. So it seems like it's a very broad power to ensure public safety. Section 27-110, Section 28-103.8 of the Building Code allows the commissioner to make determinations and impose requirements for matters not provided for in the building code or, quote, in other applicable laws and regulations, quote, where the matter is, quote, essential for the fire or structural safety of a building or for the safety or health of the occupants or users thereof by the public. So I just read that. Matters, section 27-110, matters not provided for, any matter or requirement essential for the fire or structural safety of new or existing buildings or essential for the safety or health of the occupants or users thereof or the public, and which is not covered by the provisions of this code or other applicable laws and regulations, shall be subject to determination and requirements by the commissioner in specific cases. So in the instant case, my opinion is that DOB does not have the authority to question the does have the authority to question the safety to the public of a public parking garage design with only 2 car lifts and no ramp, which allows no viable space inside of the building for cars to queue prior to accessing the valet, and the valet accessing the 150 parking spaces located in 3 subterranean levels is within DOB's authority, completely independent of the specific text in the zoning resolution. And I hand it over to Vice Chair Shanda.
Okay. I first of all, with regards to section 32-17 per use group requirement, it has to meet all the requirements of ZR 3653, which is the width of the curb cut and location of accessway to the street, ZR 3655, surfacing requirement, and ZR 3656, the required screening. And even though that has not been mentioned in the appellant's case, based on the plan that has been submitted, it doesn't seem they meet that. So I'm assuming DOB also has issues with that. I just want DOB to confirm that, because based on my read, those 3 elements have to be met by this use group 8C, which is an automotive service establishment. Now, with regards to section 36-521, I think when I read section 32-17C, the language says public parking garage or public parking lots with a capacity of 150 spaces or less subject to the provisions set forth for accessory off-street parking spaces, and they have to meet the 3 sections that I just mentioned earlier. It doesn't refer to all of the section 36. It doesn't refer to any of the other sections of 36. The ZR 3652, which is the preceding section of 36521, it refers to the size, location, identification of space, and that is not mentioned. Either 3652 or 36521 is not mentioned in 3212. So if one looks at the zoning resolution clearly, it would lead one to believe that 36521 does not apply. However, since this facility has both public and accessory parking spaces, and DOB does have the right to review this as part of it being partially public and partially accessory spaces, and apply 3652 and specifically 36521 with regards to reservoir spaces. And the language of 36521, what I find interesting, even though it gives the ors, it gives 300 or 200, or certify that it's fully attended, it still has to, I think the language still says that it has to demonstrate. So that means there is some degree of review DOB is undertaking to ensure, even if you're providing an attended parking, it works. And this is a question I would just like DOB to clarify, and that, that when a developer certifies the valet service for an accessory as of right parking facility, DOB still reviews it. And when DOB reviews it, what are the main criteria they're looking for in its review? And this review for this particular case, it was consistent in that order. I'm assuming it is because the reasons that DOB is asking those questions are extremely valid. I have to say, this is one of the most poorly designed. I mean, that I know we are not reviewing the design, but the design is very poorly laid out. And it is going to result in enormous traffic backup, and sidewalks are going to be misused and misappropriated as public parking and staging areas and everything. So DOB, I think if it's reviewing it, and that's where DOB's letter, I was wishing they would be much clearer when they review it, what are the factors they're looking into in their review, even when somebody attests that there is going to be attended parking, or it's going to be 200 square foot parking spaces, and where those same elements applied here, and they should clarify that for the record. So so that's the question I have with regards to 521. The reservoir spaces, I'm not so sure that applies here, and I am open to the discussion and more clarification on that. Based on the reading of the text, it doesn't seem so, but I understand in this case why they're requiring it, and if it is not as a result of the zoning, it is because of the 521, the public safety, and those things that are triggering it. I would like that to be clarified, and that's really where I stand on it.
Thank you. And Commissioner Otley Brown?
I feel that section 36-521 is clear. There's an option. It's given with an or, which is a conditional sentence, and one or both of the conditions could be satisfied as per ZR 1201. And so I feel that you have the option of either having the commissioner review it for safety, or you ensure that you're going to have intended parking. And the idea is that you're going to leave it to the professional to ensure that the safety and the maneuverability is guaranteed here. Now, whether or not I think that that's a good idea, I don't know if I should be weighing in on that, because I feel like the text is very clear that you have the option of ensuring attended parking. And if the appellant has ensured that he's going to have 24-hour attended parking, then I think the text suggests that you defer to the parking garage operator.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
don't go further with that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shaitan?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what has been said so far, and I would start by saying I'm not a parking expert, but I am an engineer, structural / geotech, and maybe some other areas. I deal with DOB. I used to deal with DOB and submit to them. They review my submissions, and they issue a decision or a determination. In the world of structure / geotech, sometimes DOB requires that some construction does not proceed before making sure that the adjacent building is secure. And they require for, let's say, a certification from the structural or the geotechnical engineer to make sure that this is satisfied. If I, as a PE, submit a certification to the DOB, they have to look at it, and they have the right to either take it based on my sign and seal and make me like bear full responsibility for that, or they have the right to like scrutinize it, vet it, review it, and sometimes ask me for modifications or some clarifications. I cannot think of any zoning / building code text that take the authority away from building officials / experts to review like matters that are relevant to safety of public, and just take this authority and give it to a developer or an applicant. For me, I don't believe that the legislative intent behind any code / zoning resolution or whatever could be something like that. Just Mr. Building Official, don't care about it, we'll take care of it. No, it doesn't fly for me. So based on that, I believe that the DOB, although the text for the zoning section 36.521 seems to be clear, but we have to read like behind, we have to understand the words here and think about them. Certify here doesn't mean just write a piece of paper, sign and seal it, and give it to the DOB. If somebody like, if I have an orange and it seems to be, its color it's an orange, and somebody certifies that this is a watermelon and he sign and seal, I'm not gonna say yes, I'll take it. No, so we have to look, we have to process the information that we're getting, and we have to like make our judgment works here. So first of all, I do believe that if DOB officials believe that there is a safety issue here, they have the right to like contest this and ask for clarifications, and if necessary, ultimately deny the request from whoever applicant. The other thing I want to mention here, I'm kind of like confused. Sometimes I feel like the applicant consider this facility as if it's fully public parking. And in other occasions, when reading through the submission, I feel like, okay, we concede that this is not purely public parking, it's a mix. So I'm asking them, and in their submission, they said, because the garage provides some accessory spaces, we concede that this is not like a fully public parking. And later on, they said, we do not wish to contest this third issue. Take a side. If it's public, regulation A apply. If it's accessory, regulation B apply. And I believe if the regulations applying to the different types of facilities have certain degree of stringency, if there is one that's more stringent than the other, and I'm the building official, I would apply the more stringent one when it comes to safety. None of the codes or the construction laws, when it comes to safety, tends to go to the less stringent side. Usually when you talk about rights for people against government, you go to that least stringent in case of confusion or mix-up. But when building codes talk about safety, in case of a conflict between two texts, usually pick the more stringent text when it comes to safety. So that makes sense for me. So I'm asking the applicant to tell me which side he want to pick. Is it a public parking? Does he wish to classify it as an accessory parking? This is number one. And I want to know how many accessories, because they said there are some spaces in the facility that work as accessory parking for the building. So how many spaces out of how many total? So
That much we know. We do actually know how many spaces. There are 48 required accessory parking spaces and 102 public spaces.
Oh, I haven't seen that. Sorry. Okay, so it's like 1/3, 2/3. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So that's all what I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shabeta?
Thank you, Chair. I want to first say I really appreciate each of the members of this board and how they've gotten to their own decisions and where their background and expertise has led them to their own independent conclusion. I think that's a great example of how valuable each member is here. And while I do agree that the text is very, it's clear, the text of 36.521 is clear. There is an or, and the developer certifies that each spaces are fully attended. And while I agree that that's generally where a lot of our analysis ends, I think that considering the New York City Charter, 646 and 647 of Chapter 26, and that this is a public safety issue. In this type of circumstance, there is a very good there is precedent for a balancing test to apply, and they balance the public safety against the individual's, the property owner's rights. I would like to see the applicant and the Department of Buildings research how this balancing test applies in this particular, in similar type circumstances. And that's, the rest of my notes are pretty much what was said.
Thank you very much. So I just want to say that I do agree simply with Commissioner Otley Brown's simple statement that the or says you do this or you do that. So and this is a little bit advice from our council. We're asked, what does the zoning say? But I think that DOB may have, let's say, characterized the appeal incorrectly, because instead of trying to fit an analysis into the language of the zoning resolution and say, because it describes maneuverability up at the top, we're allowed to look at maneuverability even though it's after the or. I think instead they could have resolved this on their own applying the charter and the building code and conceded to the appellant that you're right, there's an or, but we're still the purveyors of safety and we think what you're doing is unsafe. So you need to fix this. Yeah, Commissioner Shanda.
Yeah, and I think even though there is an or, it does require, there is a statement that says maneuverability in accordance with the regulations promulgated by Commissioner of Building, and the appellant states there is no such proclamation that's been written. Maybe it's not written, but it is practiced. And if there's a consistency in the practice of its review, and that is known in the industry, I would take that as a standard that DOB applies. The other thing that I thought DOB, and this is a question for DOB, is if they looked at, there's another zoning resolution section, which I think would also apply in this case, and I don't know if it was looked at, and that is the in the urban design section of the, in 3700, and I'm not able to, it's 3735, parking wrap and screening requirement. And that is for accessory parking spaces. So since this is a partly accessory and public, 3735, I think also would apply. And so.
Say again, that's parking what? It's 30, says what?
It's 3735, parking wrap and screening requirement. All accessory off-street parking spaces on the ground floor level of a building shall be wrapped by floor area in accordance with paragraph A, or where applicable, screened in accordance with applicable provisions of paragraph B of this section, which is along the street frontage, secondary street frontage, all the various requirements. So it's a question for DOB if that would apply, since DOB is saying, you know, we're treating this also as, because it has accessory parking, we're also applying the accessory parking regulations, then this section should also apply.
Okay. Any other comments on this one? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, zoning calendar, continued hearing items, 2017-317 BZ, 1693 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. At the initial hearing in January, we stated that the claimed hardship of environmental contamination had to be substantiated with investigations, a remedial action plan, and cost estimates. A site investigation was done in June of this year, and 4 underground storage tanks were discovered, and some contamination associated with that, requiring removal of soil in an area described as 500 square feet by a depth of 5 feet. When I do the cubic yard measurement for this area, which I did over and over and over and over again, I even used those calculators that you get online because my math skills are, let's say, challenged. I get only 92 cubic yards, not 463 cubic yards as stated in the report, and Commissioner Shetta is nodding his head in agreement. So I might ask, is my math off? Is there a typo somewhere? For example, there's this 2,500 number that shows up on page 11 of the report, which is then multiplied by 5 feet. Isn't that is that cubic feet or cubic inches? Because you're supposed to get it into cubic yards. So I'm thinking they translated it into cubic feet, and then they said they went for a coffee. Then they came back and they said, oh, we have 2,500. Let's multiply it by 5 again. And then they divide by 27, if that's the right math. And then they got 463 cubic yards. So let's just say that doesn't seem right. And so that math is now being continued throughout the project and description of hardship and so on. And then I, of course, couldn't analyze the other kinds of costs related to that. The July remedial cost estimate states that further testing will be needed to, quote, determine the extent of the impacted soil and groundwater. So that tells me they still don't really have the answer to the degree of impact, but let's just say, you know, they came up with a number that based on at the very least the removal of contaminated soil is inflated, but that number was $363,000. The report also states that the remediation objectives are to reduce to the extent practicable if, and I underline, if discovered the presence of petroleum hydrocarbons. So that sounds to me like maybe they didn't discover it. The tests don't seem to reveal that yet. So maybe this cost estimate is premature. Like maybe the application is premature, which is kind of what we talked about before. A lesser variance option was provided as we requested. It is a 3.59 FAR 5-story building, which is an increase of 1.59 over the allowable. with remediation costs at only, and then there was another error. It's actually only 363,000, not 383,000 as shown in the financial analysis. So that, I believe that typo ends up getting traveling. And let's say, assuming no double dipping, because I didn't look whether they've also attributed for excavation that's needed for their cellar and so on, I really still can't fathom how a more than 2 times allowable floor area increase is justified. Also, since all of these options are commercial developments, I asked, won't they be delivered to a tenant as a plain vanilla box with perhaps a work letter? So there shouldn't be figured into this acoustic tile ceilings or finished flooring in the classrooms or prep rooms and multiple toilet rooms for daycare, because that's normally the tenant build out responsibility. You know, when a medical office moves into a place, the landlord doesn't pay for that. The landlord may give a work letter, but then the tenant ultimately is paying that down in rent. And why does also the as of right commercial have so many more fit outs than the as of right hypothetical? Twice the amount of plumbing, for example. So it isn't a fair comparison if the hypothetical isn't developed to the detail of the actual. And why also is the as of right 3 stories instead of 2 that would have better floor plates with only 2, and less cost, perimeter wall, elevator stops, glazing, and so on. The as of right typical is only 2 stories. So, and ditto for the lesser variance at 5 stories instead of 4. I mean, maybe it's lovely to have this extra little height or something, but that's a cost, right? And we aren't actually throughout this whole analysis comparing apples to apples among all of the versions on so many levels. And if some have parking stackers figured into the calculations at $225,000 and some don't as a result of picking a use with a limited parking requirement, then how is that comparing apples to apples? The stackers actually cost nearly as much as the estimate on the remediation. So I ask, why is this use not taking advantage of minimal parking requirements for certain community facilities the way the as of right does? For instance, childcare services have a parking requirement of 1 space per 1,000 square feet instead of 1 place per 400 square feet or 300 square feet. And so I'm really not convinced that the degree of claimed hardship justifies more than a height and setback waiver. And I'm not even 100% sure that there's a justification for that, but in the interest of maybe improving the shape of the building or something. But the setback waiver doesn't kind of kick in until you're much taller, and you can't be much taller unless you double the FAR as requested, and I don't see the reason for doing that. So I give it to, oh, and I just want to add the seeker issues. The revised EAS was submitted on August 5th. Supplemental tank and, okay, applicant says this information, never mind, sorry, I'm just reading my notes. Okay, so Commissioner, Vice Chair Shanda.
I know at the last hearing, I felt that this project had some grounds for relief. However, when I received this revised submission, I had to reassess my position. And I would say what I found interesting was, as you said, the apples to apples. We are not looking at apples to apples here at all. When you look at the hypothetical, in the hypothetical, the applicant tried to use the best of all the zoning possibilities to maximize it. So, which is, it provides a commercial retail floor plate basement. And we know basement just has to be a 1 foot lower than the ground level, and it qualifies as a basement. And then when you look at the frontage of this as of right hypothetical, which has a, let me just look at the, I'm sorry, just give me like a second. The hypothetical has a 40-foot wide frontage, but because it's a basement, it steps down. So you have a ramp and you have to accommodate those 2 staircases and an elevator. So the front entrance narrows. And then in the back, it opens up to the 44 feet width, which is interesting because the applicant has stated that in the as of right, because of the irregular shape of the space, the commercial layout doesn't work. And because of the staircases and the angular placement of the staircases, it actually takes away from the most width of the space. I get that, but even if you were to take the narrowness of the commercial space at the ground level in an as of right, it doesn't narrow down to 20 feet or so, which is what it is in the hypothetical. It is actually much wider than even the 44 feet width. So I am not quite seeing how, therefore, the hypothetical commercial layout works, but not the as of right layout works. Same thing. I want them to look at an as of right where they're using the same zoning principles of the hypothetical. You have a basement that is built to the full lot line. Then you have a first floor that is built to the lot line. And I did my quick little drawings on it, and you can fit in 3 very large, room size, 1,600 square foot of rooms in that first floor, and can meet exactly the square footage requirement that you're providing in the hypothetical. And you could provide the natural light you can have the natural light coming from the street level, and the building in the room in the back that's in the triangular portion. You could provide, a skylight, and that would also provide natural light. So there are many ways to make the as of right work. So I'm not sure we are looking at the same comparables to even come to a conclusion that the as of right is not viable. So I really want them to make the as of right layout exactly using the same zoning principles: basement, first floor. Apply that they have applied in hypothetical, apply that in the as of right, and then apply the same parking parameters that's been applied in the hypothetical in the as of right, and then carry that forward in the lesser variance, carry that forward in the proposed, and then show the differences. So I agree with you. I think we are not looking at the same things, and it does make it very complicated. And when I was looking at the financials, the base construction cost of the hypothetical is 3.9 million for a total gross square footage of 13,200 square feet in a 3-story building. And that is much less than the as of right, which is 4.6. And that is because of a 4-story building that is built, you have an extra cost to build the core, the elevator, and an added front wall. So those are also adding into it. And if you remove that and put it all in 2-story basement and a first floor, you might be able to save the cost. So I do want to see that in the financial analysis. So the difference of that 719,000 could be minimized. And is it then the hardship just because of the contamination? And, so it's not the site configuration as much as it's the contamination of the site that is driving the need for it. And I have not, I don't think that the documents have provided that. And same thing, the difference in the community facility rental income of 198,000 between the as of right and the hypothetical. I think all of those could be improved if you do a basement and a first floor.
Mhm. Great,
So that's it.
do you want to add anything? No?
I think I'm kind of reinforcing what I've stated. So I'll stop there.
Okay.
You have a long day.
Okay, Commissioner Otley-Brown.
Oh, I agree with everything that both of you said, and I'm going to try and be as brief as I possibly can. I really feel that the uniqueness having to do with the shape of the lot is not very convincing argument to me. So if you look at their lot study, which I looked at again, within a 600-foot radius, there are 7 other lots that are similar to this lot in terms of being a triangular shape. And out of those 7 lots, this one is the 3rd largest, and it's the widest angles, which means that it's got a more regular floor plate than the others. And so therefore, I'm not convinced about the impact from the shape being unique. Now, as for whether or not the shape is actually a hardship, I'm also not convinced, because the way in which they laid out the as of right, it looks like they're trying to do whatever they can to make it look like it's more expensive than it actually is. And I agree with you, going to 2 partial floors for a daycare makes absolutely no sense to me, because the daycare should be on one very large floor plate, not on 2 classes per floor. And I think it would be a better daycare if it was all on the 2nd floor, one complete floor plate that was maybe 20 feet back from the rear lot line with rooftop play area. That would make more sense. That would be a lot cheaper to construct, because as you said, and I agree with you, you're not extending elevator stops to another floor. You're not building perimeter wall and brick and mortar up another floor. And all of that impacts the cost. Let's see. So I'm not sure that they even can prove to me that the as of right is not viable. As to the whole argument of the lot being small and the core taking up a large proportion of the lot, how is that unique and a hardship? Smaller buildings have a lower efficiency ratio. That's the same all across the city. The smaller the floor plate, the core has to be standard. It takes up more of the floor plate. So why is it so special here? I'm not convinced by that at all. Let's see. As for the financials themselves, I asked them to take a look at the site value, and they did. They changed the FAR that they divided into all of the different comparables, and then that ended up raising the site value, which I thought might happen. They kept the community facility leases, the office leases, and the retail the same as before, because I hadn't raised any questions about it. They did change the base construction costs, but that was really more cost fluctuating because of their difference in gross square footage, but they were fairly slight fluctuations. I think the big issue here are really the macro issues that I just mentioned, more so than the individual little issues. I did have a question about the impact of the layout of each floor into 2 offices on the marketability and the amount of rent you could get, because I feel once you split a floor plate into 2 offices, you have to provide more common area, because you have to have an office lobby. And so then that impacts the size of each individual office and maybe makes that less marketable. It also underscores their whole argument about the core taking up too much of the building. And so therefore, I think that it should just be 1 office floor laid out as an open office plan with as little deducted for core as possible, even though they are counting that in the income. What it's doing is it's supporting their argument that this isn't going to work. And that to me doesn't work. When they do consider the income for each of the office spaces, they are considering the lobby space and assigning income to it, but they're not assigning any income to the 500 square feet in the office lobby on the 1st floor. And that I wanted to question. I'm wondering why, because that's about an extra $20,000 worth of income. And so I think they should consider it. I agree with you. They did bump up the remediation costs by $20,000 in the financials in all of the scenarios. And that's problematic, because it should be $363,000 as per the report. And those are my comments at the moment. From what I see here, I don't find it convincing. And any argument that they give us about the parking being an issue in terms of impacting the amount of income you can get from this is not an argument I'm going to accept at all, because that's self-created, because the as-of rights don't require parking, because they're much smaller buildings, and the combination of the uses means that whatever parking is generated from any retail on the 1st floor is waivable. And so therefore, for them to make an argument that now we have to put 18 spaces on the 1st floor, this is a hardship. That's a self-created hardship, because they're going for a larger building. So that I don't accept at all.
Okay, thank you. So can you help me with this thing about tenant build out? Like they're showing the daycare center fully fitted out in the as of right, standard as of right? Shouldn't there either be everyone fitted out or no one fitted out?
I mean, I agree with you. In order for it to be apples to apples, it should be, both scenarios should be done the same way. You're absolutely right.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just taking up. Okay. Commissioner Sheta, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not gonna repeat what is said. I agree with all what is said so far about this case. This case is kind of a typical case that need like attention from our side, not to waste our time. First of all, I would say that I visited the site last week. I have noticed excavation like on the southern portion of the property. And I have seen some cracks in the building next door, on the side walls, the perimeter walls, and on the facade as well. And I spoke to somebody on site that he told me that he's one of the the owners of that building, and I told him that he need to consult an engineer. And they told me that they have no clue that there is a variance application for that property. Just to let you know. Yeah, so apparently nobody notified them that there is a variance application. I will address a statement in the cover letter by the applicant that says as it's addressing the supplemental subsurface investigation that they performed. And it says this, as requested by the board, a supplemental subsurface investigation was performed. I want to make it crystal clear that we did during the last hearing was questioning the evidence of the hardship that's based on environmental remediation needed at the property. But at no time I recall that we directed the applicant to do like a supplemental investigation. We said you're basing this on an assumptions, pair the language of the previous submission. And they elected to do additional investigation to prove it to us, which is fine. But we haven't requested a specific investigation, neither geotech nor environmental, to make that clear. The third point I want to talk about is the hardship in this case, the claimed hardship. My understanding from by the end of the last hearing, that the major component in the claimed hardship here is the environmental issue. And we made it crystal clear, like a case that was here during the last hearing, that the shape on this case is not participating to any hardship whatsoever. The site is very deep. Yes, it is triangular, close to a triangular shape, but the shape is not contributing to the hardship. That was clear. I did listen to ourselves during the last hearing 2 times, and that was made clear. It was a direction again to the financial analyst, the game of the hypothetical versus the actual. We said it's not gonna fly, and when we say enough, then it should be enough, because again it's time and effort, and it makes us, at least it make me disappointed and frustrated when I say no, I don't want to see something, and then it is submitted and I have to look at it. So that the hardship coming from the shape here, based on our instructions during the last hearing, is nothing. Was that reflected in the submission? If you look at the pro forma of the financial analysis, and I'm going to share my screen. I'm not sure why I'm not able to share my screen. It says host disabled.
Try again.
Try again.
Okay. Yeah, it's working. So this is the pro forma here. If you look at, compare these two numbers, this guy 3.9 million, this guy 4.6 million. The environmental thing is out here. It's not participating. But if you compare these two numbers, one of them is for the hypothetical rectangular, the other one is the actual. If you subtract these numbers, the difference is the hardship imposed by the shape. That's 0.7 million. If you look at the hardship imposed by the remediation per their claim at this point, and I'm gonna come to that, it's almost 50%. So based on the discussions from the last hearing, SHAPE is not participating to the hardship. That was our conclusion. Applicant is insisting that it is, but not only this, but it's causing as much as twice hardship as the major, what we believed is the major component of the hardship, the remediation. That doesn't make any sense. And it's, honestly, it's waste of time. So the soft cost, I spoke about this point yesterday. I was making fun actually of this. In the like hypothetical, the soft cost is about 0.75 million. There is a difference of about $150,000 in the soft cost just because of the shape. If I'm a geotechnical engineer, I never factored in the shape of the lot in my proposal to a client. If the shape is rectangular or trapezoidal, what is gonna make, which difference gonna make for a structural engineer, for the geotechnical engineer, for an architect, for mechanical engineer? Nothing. Soft cost are these guys. Probably it's loans, but again, for a bank, it doesn't make any difference. So I'm not sure why there is 150 out of 750,000 difference. It's like a lot. This is like 25% difference just because of the shape. So it sounds like the shape here was like pushed to carry the major component of the hardship because we scrutinized the cost associated with the remediation. So this is for the shape. If we move to the remediation cost, I'm not sure if you're able to see that screen, or let me stop and reshare. Yeah, this is the remediation cost. 500 square feet. I'm glad you caught this, Chair. 500 square feet is what is excavated. 500 times 5 feet deep. This is 2,500 cubic feet divided by 27, about 93 cubic yards, not 463 cubic yards. That by itself, that item, that mistake takes out 30 grand. If you're looking at my shared screen, whatever is in the red, this is the corrected number, and the purple one is the savings because of the correction. If we go to the underground storage tanks, yes, they said there are, I wasn't able to see 3 tanks in the pictures, but I would believe them. There are 3 underground storage tanks. Each is 550 gallon. I have removed tanks similar size. That tank is about 4 feet in diameter and 6 feet long. It's actually it looks like a cylinder. So its diameter is 4 feet and 6 feet in length. And that could be in some areas, it could be taken out for as low as $1,500 per tank. You get the guy, he does the testing, and he pulled that tank out for just 1,500, not 15 grand, just 1,500. So 50 grand to pull out 3 tanks that are 6 feet tall, 4 feet diameter, 50 grand, that's excessive. And the associated support of excavation, you already dug down to the top of the tank. I'm not sure what support of excavation is needed to pull these tanks out. And you know what? You're implementing an excavation support for the entire property. Why you want to put SOE to remove the tanks and then remove the tanks and then pay for that SOE and then reinstall another excavation support for the building? Just put one system and use it to excavate for the building and remove the tanks. So the 40 grand here should be entirely eliminated because they are implemented in the general construction cost. And the 50 grand, I didn't want to take him to 10 grand for the removal of the 3 tanks. I said, let me say this is 25. So far we're saving 30, 25, 40. And then this item, 125. If you go back to the last submission and you look at the same item, we're back to the bubble game. You will beat me on this, I'll pump it up somewhere else. That item in the previous submission was 78,000, and we didn't even buy that number. 78,000 for a vapor barrier is excessive, and they are claiming that they're gonna put SSDS, sub-slab depressurization system. Why? If you're removing the source, which is the tank, and you're removing the contaminants, why do you want to put SDS? If you want to put it, be my guest, but why you want to like factor this in that cost estimate? So vapor barrier by itself, and I would say it is needed no matter what. If I'm building something in New York City, 12 feet deep, no matter what, the building has contamination or not, I would recommend that the owner install vapor barrier, but I would factor it in here as 40 grand. So that number, which was 78, I supposed to take it down during the last hearing to 40 grand. So this is 85,000 gone. If you add up these numbers to that 31,000 reduction because of the engineering fees, a staff engineer sent to a site to observe excavation during construction of a building like this. And I used to work for a firm that's very reputable. Our fees were kind of, people describe it as high compared to others because of the quality of the work we used to do. I charge it no more than 800 per day for a staff engineer. 1850 is actually $350 more than what I used to charge for a professional engineer full day on site. 1,850 is not the right number to use here. Maximum 850 or $800 per day. That takes the 55,500 down to 31. And finally, the closing report. Again, the cost for the closing report is too high. If I add up these numbers, the cost for the remediation in total at most would be 165, probably 150 or less. So based on submissions from other cases, this number is very typical number for remediation cost for a typical site in the city. Every single site in the city has historical fails. They have under storage tanks. Yes, I understand that they claim that this site was used as a gas station. I'm not sure about that. But even though if it was, that remediation is not gonna cost more than 150 to 175, maybe even much less, like I said. So remediation wise, these numbers are much less than claimed. The other point I want to talk about is that groundwater contamination. They said in their RAP that the groundwater is about 22 feet below grade. And fine, I'll take that. But when I looked at the borings, these are the boring logs that they did. And if you look here, it says temporary monitoring well at 25 feet. That means that they installed the pipe for the well to 25 feet. I explained it to you why I'm skeptical about this application. So the well was installed to 25 feet, but if you go down to the boring and what it says here, EOB at 22 feet. EOB means end of boring. This is the end of the drilling. So how come you drilled to 22 and you were successful to install a monitoring well PVC pipe down to 22 feet, to 25 feet? It's not possible. And then if you drilled to 22 feet, how come you justified that the groundwater is at 22 feet? Just based on the witness of the sample, it can be done like that. To monitor groundwater or to justify a groundwater table, you have to dig below, you have to drill below a groundwater table, and then put a PVC pipe perforated 2 or 3 feet inside, and then plug it 2 or 3 feet with a sealant, and then monitor that for some period of time. This is not done here. And even though they are saying that the groundwater is as 22 feet. So I'm not sure if this is what they are justifying. The other issue is and I spoke about this during the first hearing. I said many of the quantities are exaggerated and they need to be looked at. However, this is not done. If you look at the construction cost estimate, and I was successful to take that and put it in Excel and look at some numbers. Bear with me 1 second. I'm trying to share my screen again. Yeah, you look at these numbers. Mass excavation. Price is $85. That's like triple what should be used. Perimeter backfill. Why do you need backfill? You're gonna put excavation support system. You're gonna dig exactly to the limits of the site, and then you're gonna pour your foundation wall. Again, is the shearing you put, the timber shearing you put. So you don't need to worry about backfilling anything here. There is a backfill quantity factor then. Disposal, $25. So disposal and excavation by itself, it's $110. This is excessive. Shoring and shearing, $100, $1,500 per linear foot. This is a price for steel shearing. Per the drawing submitted on this application, the excavation support is not a steel shearing, it's timber shearing. That's what I've seen in the drawings signed and sealed by the architect. And again, if you look at the foundation, mat slab, 2 feet thick, the quantity is 326 cubic yards. And look at this. If you look at the foundation plan here, this is not a mat slab. This is a spread footing system. And the quantity for this system, the amount of the concrete, is not 326. It's just 35 cubic yards. So that 35 cubic yards were taken up to 325 quantity-wise. If you add up the adjustments from these numbers in the construction cost, it's gonna be almost 1.2 million, 1.1 million reduction in the cost for the as of right. So that's why the as of right, when you look at it, it seems that it's not feasible. So if we fix these numbers, if we fix the construction, the remediation cost, and if you consider what was said about the shape of the site, I believe this project should be more than feasible considering the as of right scenario for the existing site shape.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is that,
But by the way, this is what I got. Give me 1 second. This is the tank. Length is 72 inches. Diameter is 48 inches. It's like a toy. This is not a huge tank for a gas station. They have 3 pieces. And although I haven't seen any tanks in the pictures, nor during my site visit because the excavation was like backfilled, but okay, I'll take it. 3 tanks like that. And the cost factor then was in 2,000 or 1,500, like I did it before. I fact almost like 8,000 per tank. So please just be like objective here, and when we like issue instructions, follow them.
okay. Thank you. Is that it? Because I do want to move on. It's 10 after
Thank you.
11.
Thank you.
Okay, I really appreciate that. You can see applicants and those listening how detailed the analysis is. I do want to add that Commissioner Otley Brown does exactly the same thing, creates her own spreadsheets, and most of the time doesn't show us her spreadsheets. But the analyses are very much in depth from both of those commissioners with respect to financials. So I'll go to Commissioner Shabeta. You're muted.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I will not be that detailed. Now, because in the issue of time, I'm just going to state that I'm not convinced that the shape is unique because there are 7 other lots similar shape to this one, and I believe this one is better situated than most. So I don't believe that's unique, and nor do I believe, I haven't been convinced that the shape in and of itself alone is a hardship. I wasn't convinced that a true as of right is not viable. I believe that the difference of about a little over nearly $700,000 in cost related to the building of both sites is something that they fabricated by the design of the sites and configuration. And I don't believe that's related to the alleged hardship. I think the hardship needs to be the driving force of the variance, and I'm not convinced by that that this applicant has made that finding. That being said, my only advice to the applicant would be to take the notes that we've heard today and to respond to them in writing. I don't believe that any of us are going to be convinced by a drawn-out hearing here. I think this is something that either they take seriously and try to go back to the drawing board and give us something that is responsive to our comments, rather than try to convince us that this application meets the findings.
Thank you. Any last minute comments on this? Otherwise we move on. Okay.
Item number 2019-265BZ 60371A. This is 35 Giffords Lane, Staten Island.
Okay, the project was revised, but there's still an access egress onto the Lamoka/Sampson streets. And we directed the applicant to eliminate that egress since that small residential street is not an appropriate route for the potential for heavy utilization during active worship days. And at the same time, I acknowledge letters provided by former firefighters, but we have the actual fire department present at these hearings, and we rely on fire department's recommendations. I actually see no change to the site plan other than some planting, and no planting on the shared property line with the residential neighbor. It's shown as concrete, and no changes to any other portion of the project. Hence, it seems no response to our comments with respect to planning. No dimensions added to the sanctuary as was requested by Commissioner Otley Brown, and I'm sure others noted other deficiencies. We also asked that the application be structured to request waivers under General City Law 35 and zoning section 72-01G, which was discussed in the revised statement of facts. It isn't clear to me that any further waivers of the side and rear yards are required. In fact, I don't think they are, because this is an existing BSA approved building under a 7221 use variance. And if I understand it correctly, the building became non-conforming and the existing bulk non-complying, and conversion to a conforming use is permitted as of right without regard to existing bulk. So the only 7221 waiver that I can see is the continuation of the front yard obstruction along Sampson, and perhaps a tree waiver, which we'll discuss below, while the other front yard waivers into the bed of Lamoka can be accomplished through 72.01G. One of my last comments at the last hearing concerned reconfiguration of the building to respond to the residential character of Sampson and to, quote, in my words, do a good project. There aren't even elevations of the building sides or indications of materials. I think the response was very incomplete. This is a residential neighborhood, and the addition that faces onto Sampson should be respectful of the residential character. The drawings now include a better zoning analysis, including a breakdown of corner and interior lots. I think, though, and this isn't really material except to say that you should be citing the regulations that apply properly. I think, though, that the rear yard regulation cited for the interior lot in the R2 is incorrect. This location is an interior lot with a rear lot line that backs up to a side lot line for the adjacent property. Section 24-361B, which is cited in the drawings, is for deep lots that extend beyond the 100-foot street line and share property lines with adjoining side yards. So this is not, with respect to Lamoka, a deep lot. It's an average, it's actually relatively shallow lot. So then that special provision in 24-361B doesn't apply. It's really designed for very large corner lots. 24-361, as I said, so for the portion that is an interior lot, a 30-foot rear yard is required, and a one-story structure is not a permitted obstruction in an R2. So just the citation to and the drawing that reflects where it obstructs the required rear yard should be corrected. However, as this is an existing building, it's a 1973 variance for a plumbing supply store, and the existing building will be enlarged. The as of right should have reflected retention of the existing building to take advantage of the existing non-compliant conditions. So the as of right is oddly a tear down, and that's not correct. It needs to be the existing building with whatever's permitted as of right in terms of an enlargement. Lot coverage calculations were provided, but as so much of the site is covered in parking, I'd like to know, does the site comply with the regulations for required open space? Also, a waiver is requested for the number of required trees. I ask, why can't the number of required trees be provided? Again, it's a residential neighborhood. What are the criteria for the trees to be provided? Because they're saying they're providing instead, they're providing half of the trees that seem to meet the requirements and half that don't seem to meet them. And I don't know why. what would be the programmatic rationale for a tree waiver? Also, where is the trash storage? They mentioned that it's going to be in the parking lot. Oh no, it must be maintained inside the building. And if there are receptions at this house of worship, then there must be a refrigerated trash storage receptacle sized to meet demand. There's standard calculations to figure out the size of the refrigerated. It's a unit that you buy. It looks like a big refrigerator, and it compacts and refrigerates the perishables. My comments are actually fairly redundant and reflecting the last hearing, since they are the same as the last hearing and were answered here. The mezzanine is still not ADA compliant, even though the floor is an existing floor, if I understand it correctly. This renovation and enlargement probably exceeds what the Department of Building considers to be an alteration that requires compliance with sprinklers and ADA and so on. It kicks it into requiring it to meet 2014 building code. The community board actually noted that in their recommendation to deny the fact of lack of ADA compliance in that mezzanine. What it's doing is it's telling you that no disabled person can work in the administration of this house of worship. Department of Transportation provided a comment letter on July 2nd. It doesn't say specifically, so we still have to wait for that it doesn't have road improvement plans, but does indicate the extent to which they hold title in LaMocha, which does exclude the subject site. They also had comments about the parking capacity of the project and curb cuts. The architect's letter states that they won't be providing sprinklers. I advise the architect to comply with whatever fire department's directions are, as this board relies on their expertise and safety concerns. And I note that phase 1 was submitted on August 20th, so it hasn't had a chance to be reviewed by DEP. Okay, Commissioner, Vice Chair Shanda.
Okay. So first of all, I thank the applicant for providing a little bit better zoning analysis, and I agree with Madam Chair that they should cite the zoning regulation sections for each one of the elements noted in the drawings. You know, my concern is that the applicant wants to use the Sampson Avenue entrance because as the letter that was provided by the former FDNY member, that access from Sampson Avenue would be helpful for emergency purposes. I think if that's the case, then it should be only for emergency purposes. I don't see why it should be then used by patrons. Patrons can continue to come from Giffords Lane and can exit only for emergency purposes. That entrance can be opened and made accessible. I don't have an issue with that being used only for emergency purposes, and there should be a mechanized way of letting that happen, but it shouldn't be used for regular services. It's regular services, not an emergency. So, and you get ample warning when an emergency is happening. So you open the door at that time, and I think that's okay. With regards to the frontage on Sampson, the illustrated drawing, the illustrative renderings that were provided, it makes the building extremely bleak. I think there are ways of making that facade facing Sampson much, much more attractive and more respectful of the residential character by providing, I would say, even fake windows if you want to give it a little bit more of the fact that it's not a warehouse. There's some activities that is happening and it is respectful of it. I understand if you don't want to have too much windows for noise purposes and other things, but there are other ways of addressing it. And again, also with the landscaping, I think there should be more robust landscaping especially along Sampson Avenue, and to buffer more of the parking that is being proposed. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Oh, I do have one question. The transportation analysis, I think that the EAS, the numbers, number of congregants, it's somewhat different in the cover letter than in the zoning chart.
Okay. Okay, so just a second. Commissioner Otley Brown?
I just had questions about where the trash enclosure was on the outside, which you had talked about. The chain link fence still has barbed wire, and why is that going to remain in both scenarios? And the lighting plan seems to be above zero at the lot lines. And other than that, I mean, I echo what was previously said, but I just don't want to be repetitive, basically.
Thank you. What is it? You said chain link fence, and what was the other one?
The chain link fence has barbed wire. The lighting plan is above zero at the lot lines. The refrigerated trash room and outdoor trash enclosure are not clearly pointed out on the plans.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Commissioner, oh, yeah, I'm just gonna go around the room.
Sure.
And then okay. Commissioner Shetta?
Thank you, Chair. In addition to what is said, on page 11 of 12, this is the lighting plan. I see that there are some contour lines. I'm not sure if these are contours for the lighting. And if the answer is yes, I don't believe they are correct, because contour lines do not intersect. This is like a rule. When you draw contour lines, you do not intersect, like the way it's shown on the plans. And yes, I see some like higher than zero values at the property line, but I believe they like let this just go because the adjacent property is not a residential property, maybe. So I'm even if it stays as like one or so, around one or so, and the adjacent property is commercial, I'm okay with that, because this is I would say this is like a house of worship, and the parking lot is it's very shallow and very like lengthy, so probably they need a good lighting there. So I would be fine with the exceedances, but please, if these are contour lines, fix them or even remove them at all. We don't need them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Shivetta?
So I echo what has been said. I do want to say, just in philosophy, I don't believe that their programmatic needs means they can't be responsive to the community's concerns. I think they need to address that. They haven't given me anything that means this building has to be exactly the way. They haven't changed much since the last hearing, but this building has to be this way because of some other reason. They don't have that. And if they can't give me a programmatic reason why things can't be more responsive to community concerns, then they aren't entitled to that. So I understand what our duty here is and what the precedent says, but you don't just get to build whatever you want. You need to have a basis for it. And I haven't seen that here. And I think they need to go back to the drawing board, because they don't have any viable reason why this has to stay exactly the way they say it does.
Okay, and Commissioner Shanda had her hand up.
Yeah, I think I was actually looking at the illustrative plan with regards to the rendering, and in that it doesn't show a chain link fence. I just kind of wanted to put, it looks like it's a metal fence, and if that's what they're proposing, then their drawings should clearly provide the material and the specification. And as Commissioner Shetta pointed out, the lighting level, I'm okay with it. I wanted to actually mention that and I forgot. And I'm okay with it partly because the church itself, the building is kind of like the buffer between the light that is casting on the parking lot from the residential, and next to the parking lot is a railway station. So I think this is kind of in many ways a dead end, and I was okay with the lumen level.
I just wanted to say the site plans say chain link fence with barbed wire to remain.
No, I agree with you. And that's why I'm saying I was looking at the illustrative plan. So
Yeah.
if that's what they're showing in the illustrative plan, that should be, that should match what's in the site plan. I
Oh,
agree with you.
okay.
I just want to add, if they don't have a programmatic need for that chain link fence or barbed wire,
Oh.
that shouldn't be there.
Yes.
It's
I
a
agree.
place of worship. There's no need for barbed
Right.
wire there.
Oh, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, that's quite strange. I just finally was able to open the drawings and see what you mean. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to, this is part of what I'm talking about. This
Right.
is, they're completely ignoring where the community that they're in. They need to have some respect for where they're going to be, and they need to be a good neighbor and address that appropriately.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So, you know, what's funny about illustrative renderings, right? The person who does the renderings isn't usually the person who does the drawings, and the person who does the renderings starts off following the architectural drawings and says, no, I can't actually release my rendering if I have chain link and barbed wire. So I'm going to show metal picket, right? Because they're like, no, I can't. So, so what the renderer did was try to soften up the brutality of the building, but it actually looks like, you know, any number of really terrible institutional buildings, or not even institutional. I'm not even sure what to say. They did, so the rendering shows these tall windows that make it look a little bit more church-like, but it has this blank facade that faces the neighbor. It's really, and I'm assuming that there's going to be recladding of this building in order to build it, right? So there's an existing building to which they add, right? But it's really unusual if you don't reclad something where you're trying to spiff it up. And if they're talking about not doing that, I would say that's also really disrespectful of the neighbors, that they're asking for variances, many, and this has to be something that contributes to the community and doesn't detract from it or create really an eyesore. It's just a bigger eyesore. So I agree with everyone. And in terms of this emergency gate or access, I'm not really, I mean, I would say that, for instance, we know that fire department will drive over everything, right, if they need to get to it. So for example, if this had some sort of a breakaway something, but it was actually a lawn, then cars wouldn't drive over it. The fire department would, right, from Sampson. Or because and maybe there's a gate there that allows the fire department to go through like a break gate. But that's only if the fire department, our representative of the fire department, thinks that this is necessary, because the statements from other people who are parishioners who were firefighters are not the same as statements from the actual fire department and emergency services. So, and we often see parking lots with only one way in and out. So why is this one different? That's my basic. Did you get it? Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry. That was a little bit of, yeah, swatting. Okay. So I think we can now move on to the public hearing, right? That's the last one for this morning.
Okay. Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals public hearing for August 25th, 2020. This is a 10 a.m. session. The first case is 2019-190A 40-17 28th Avenue, Queens. This is an appeal.
Good morning. Tony, do I need to be sworn in?
No, not for appeals.
Perfect. That's good to hear. So, good morning. My name is Frank Noriega. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I'm here from Sheldon Lobel PC. We listened to your comments, and I think I'm just going to jump right in to really restate what we're here for. And it's really determination that the zoning resolution does not require reservoir spaces. And to go further, that the zoning resolution section that was presented by the DOB, 36521, doesn't give them additional authority to require them. In fact, it has two methods of compliance when these parking lots have between 200 and 300 square feet of space provided per car. Now, that's not the only requirement of that section. There are other requirements that the stalls themselves have to be 8.5 by 18 feet. And if we were above 300 square feet per space, we wouldn't be here at all. There wouldn't be a question of whether or not that section would apply. It would not. The only question is if you're between 200 and 300 square feet, which nobody's contesting that we're less than 200. And if you comply with that, and the applicant has the ability to certify that if they're going to have less than 300 but more than 200 square feet, that if it's fully certified or certified that it's fully attended, that they that it is permissible. And this is again, this is an as of use right for a public parking garage.
As of right use.
It is an as of right use.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Chair.
Yeah, no. You switched the words around. I'm just correcting you. It's an as of right use.
Correct. This is an as of right use. But I also wanted to point out, so there was a question about just certifying that this was fully attended. That same section also requires that that statement be on the certificate of occupancy, further requiring that they are there at all times and paid. The requirement isn't just that we certify it on the plans that it's going to be fully attended. There are other requirements in addition to that. Now, from what I'm gathering, what the board has said in their comments, that the section is pretty clear. There are two forms or two methods of compliance. Either we certify it, which we are proposing to do, or we follow rules promulgated by the commissioner. And we have not yet seen any rules promulgated by the commissioner. And we're not even saying that they couldn't promulgate such a rule requiring reservoir spaces. We just haven't seen that, nor are we required to comply with it because we are choosing the other method of compliance. That is really what it boils down to. We haven't been presented with anything else. Excuse me one moment. Turn off my phone. So we haven't seen any other section of the zoning resolution, which this is what it is a zoning resolution question. If DOB is relying on something above and beyond that, that has not been presented to us. And we can't even begin to answer some of the other questions for denying the application, such as screening or enclosures within a building, before we can first determine whether or not we have to have these reservoir spaces to begin with and how many. There was a question of whether or not this was a public parking garage versus an accessory parking garage. And there are indeed accessory spaces, but they can be provided in a public parking garage. One of the arguments that was originally made in one of the zoning resolution determinations, the ZRD1s, was that this particular section that's being relied on does not apply to public parking garages, which I think one of the commissioners commented on that yes, the use lists specific zoning requirements that public parking garages have to comply with. However, Commissioner Rebholz, I thank him for directly responding to this issue, pointed out that once you introduce accessory parking, which we are doing, that we do have to comply with some of the other additional accessory parking requirements. So we didn't want to argue that anymore. We said, okay, we agree with you that if we're going to introduce accessory parking, the accessory parking at the very least would have to comply with this. So we are going to be subject to 36521. However, it doesn't really matter if we're public parking garage versus accessory parking garage. Accessory parking garages are also permitted here, and up to 150 spaces, they are as of right, again, they are an as of right use. And further, there are provisions, and the language is different. If you want to exceed 150 spaces for an accessory parking garage, it requires commissioner approval. And that language is different than what's in 36521. It's not that there are rules promulgated, that it requires commissioner approval for the layout, and that, among other things, if you exceed that, you have to provide a minimum of 10 reservoir parking spaces. That's different for a couple reasons. One, we're not exceeding 150 spaces, and I believe perhaps the architect can chime in. We're still in the process because this is hasn't been approved, we may not even go up to 150 because again, we have to comply with certain other items like providing 200 square feet per parking space. It may be reduced. But the calculation as far as how many reservoir spaces we're being told is 10%. Now, in that similar zoning provision for the accessory parking garages, the minimum is 10 for over 150 spaces. It's not even 10%. What the commissioner is requiring, or the DOB is requiring in this case, is above and beyond what is required for other situations in the zoning resolution where we have larger parking spaces, and they're requiring something that exceeds that. And it's contrary to what zoning is requiring.
Can I just, when I was reviewing the plans that were part of the ZRD, because we didn't get the complete floor plan as part of the submissions, it's only the complete floor plans were in the ZRD submissions. When I was looking at it, and when, as Madam Chair has mentioned, when we review parking, we look at what is being provided, how much can be fitted in reality, and based on that, what is the circulation, reservoir spaces. I have to say this parking space, even though you're saying you can fit in 150, you can put in more than 150 using attended parking by providing various mechanisms. And we know valet parkers are excellent and in packing it. So I do think there is a reason why, you're going by the letter of the law, exactly what the zoning says, but the application of this parking space is going to be more than what actually is being stated. So I do think DOB, in its judgment of reviewing safety and operation and what is permitted by zoning to review that is reasonable. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I just want to add or pose a question. So let's just say it's 200 square. You're meeting the, let's say, the calculation of 200 square feet per space, which is really just 200 square feet in the entire garage area. Let's say the 200 square feet were consumed by a very tight column spacing where it's actually physically impossible to drive the cars around. Are you suggesting that DOB has no authority to look at it and say, spacing is 10 feet on center? How are you supposed to drive the cars through this? How are you going to get the stackers in here? You're showing the stackers in this sort of 80% of actual, you go to your little CAD drawing and it provides a little CAD stacker and you drop it in and you say, oh, it's not really good. So you reduce the size of the little CAD thing to fit it between the 10-foot on center columns. What you're suggesting is DOB has zero authority to look at that layout and say, sorry, but we just don't believe it. And so we're not going to allow you to have 150 parking spaces here. And therefore, you need to reduce the size of your parking garage. You don't think that they have any authority to do that?
I'm not saying they don't have any authority to review the plans. They certainly do, and they are. They have brought up some valid arguments of why that the layout doesn't comply as is, but that's not the question. And they have not raised that as an issue as whether or not that the layout of the inside of the parking garage is inadequate. That's not the question. It's whether or not that because there are 150 spaces or a large number of spaces, which will actually likely be fewer than that, that we are required to provide 10%, an equivalent of 10% as reservoir spaces in front of the building.
No, actually, I think that you're misreading what they're suggesting. And I see Mr. Dioronzo's hand up. I think you're misinterpreting what they're saying. So, and because not to mention the fact that you've got layers upon layers of ZRD1s, and really should be looking at the last one because that's what we're basing it on. The idea of reservoir spaces came up because they're trying to figure out a solution for what is really no offense, but a poorly designed parking garage where there's no place to get the cars off the street while they wait to get into the elevator. yesterday, just as for an example, we had an open parking lot where there's a discussion about having stackers on the open parking lot would delay throughput by 30 seconds a car. So that's a stacker where you drive right into it, and that's a little bit of a lift, right? So it's a lift that's only going up half a story. It goes up like 7 or 6 feet, something like that. You're talking about an elevator that's going down to the subcellars and coming up to grade, and it needs to do that throughput so quickly that where else are the cars going to be but on the street? And since it's valet parking, you have the guys receiving the cars, and everyone knows this. Where are they going to receive the cars? To the outside, to the street, to the curb. That's just the reality of how it's going to work. So DOB says, this isn't working for us. You need to come up with another solution that persuades us that you will have some kind of reservoir to get all of the spaces off the street, and then overlaying on top of that, that you can't, that the that's
You're breaking
grade
up.
on site. Oh, I'll switch again to a new. I'm switching Wi-Fi. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you see me? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So DOB's suggestion is actually an effort to improve the safety of that site, and it seems to me it is the question, does DOB have the authority? I grant that what's before us is the zoning resolution, and I think most of us agree that the zoning resolution gives you this alternative. But at the same time, I really question why you would want to build something, your client would want to build something that is not in the best interest of the community, and you're set back from the street for no apparent reason. I looked up all the zoning regulations and I can't figure out why in the world the building is set back as far as it is, because it doesn't comply with alternate setback requirements. I don't know. So I'm going to recognize Mr. D'Oronzo had his hand up. You have to unmute yourself though.
Morning to you, Madam Chair, to the other commissioners. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. Beyond the binary option afforded by the zoning resolution as far as the minimum floor area required to meet certain guidelines as it pertains to fully attended parking, I just wanted to say a couple of things. Number one, I personally have had a continued dialogue with Commissioner Derek Lee. The dialogue was meant to find a solution to the items raised by the building department. I have personally had probably 7 meetings over the course of many months. I have directed my office to respond and to accommodate basically every request made by Commissioner Derek Lee. We ended up also decreasing the number of parking spaces from 150, which seems to be the consensus here today, to 113, thus also decreasing the load expectations on the site itself. We also presented a letter from a parking operator outlining the speed at which these elevators operate. Also to meet certain skepticism by Commissioner Derek Lee. So beyond the legality of the project, which we believe to be transparent, we were ready. I have personally been one of the stakeholders, as I mentioned, in a full dialogue with Derek Lee in the Department of Buildings. That is what I wanted to contribute.
Okay, I appreciate that. So this is a situation where DOB is negotiating. You brought down the number of spaces to 113. Did you improve in some way how cars will be taken off the street while they're waiting to get into the elevator, or they're going to drive down? It's not really clear. Are they driving down to the bottom of the ramp and then being taken into the elevator, come back up? I mean,
So one of the other things we did was to add a curb cut on. So this building is on a corner lot, which borders 28th Avenue on one side and 41st Street on the other. In the efforts I mentioned before, we used to have one curb cut on 41st Street and added one on 28th Avenue. Simply to gain access to this reservoir space area. The idea was to have attendees maneuver the cars through this reservoir space area. And in order to obtain such area, we actually modified the design of the building, which should explain the setback you were inquiring about just a few moments ago. As I mentioned, this has been an open dialogue for a number of years, and we are here before you simply because that dialogue was then, first we were requested to present an AI1. Actually, I first showed up at the commissioner's office. I was requested to present an AI1. Then several new meetings took place. Then I was requested to present a determination, which a ZRD1 determination, which also introduced some building code item, which really didn't have room to be present in ZRD1. Regardless, we are here this morning simply because beyond the ZRD1, there wasn't very much we could contribute and offer.
so wait a second. So you said it accounts for the setback. You mean your building was built to the lot line before?
No, it had a setback, but it wasn't in the amount that you see in the plan.
So it was a shallower setback.
Yes, correct.
But you can understand, I mean, I can't even imagine how your number 7 car turns the corner to get into reservoir space 6. It's a right angle.
In fact,
Unless it's one of those Dymaxion cars from Frank Lloyd Wright that has wheels that spin.
I wish they existed. However, that is the reason why we added a curb cut on 28th Avenue, which in prior designs, it did not exist.
Right, but
If I may interject, and this kind of goes back to what I said before, we can't really design a property without knowing if these reservoir spaces are required. The original.
no, I'm sorry, Mr. Noriega, it's not the question.
The
Question is, no, it isn't, because that's not what we're being presented with. Whether 50, sorry, I'm now losing the number here. Whether 36.521 allows DOB to inquire about the layout of your parking or doesn't. That's the zoning resolution in front of us.
I 100% agree.
Okay, so it's not about reservoir spaces. DOB is saying the parking garage isn't safe and we want you to make changes to it.
No,
right? And what we're saying is, most of us are saying that, I think, and correct me, any commissioners if I'm wrong, that we don't disagree that it's an either or, that you either provide 300 square feet or you certify that you have valet parking. But what we are also saying, I think most of us, is that DOB has the authority to ensure safety of the public, and that it does not believe that this layout is safe for the public. And therefore, so those reservoir spaces, whatever you want to call them, those spaces outside, both aren't permitted because they're outside of the building, and they also aren't believable. I mean, I haven't seen the revised plan that only shows 113 spaces, but what I'm looking at on the ZRD1, the last one, shows impossible right angle turns. So no way that a car can actually do that. 2 impossible right angle turns. So other than lip service to the reservoir, I don't see how they work. And so DOB, what I'm saying is DOB has the authority to look at it and say, I don't believe that works. Your colonnade, your column colonnade is only 10 feet on center and you need 8.5 feet just for a car and you only have 8.5 feet. So how's this going to even work?
So maybe I can clarify, maybe there's confusion here. The parking spaces that we're referring to, whether it be 113 or 115, are not these spaces we're talking about in front of the building. They're all within the building, in the cellar and subcellar.
I know.
These are not required parking spaces. And in the original design, we didn't have any of these spaces.
We understand that.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because ideally, we wouldn't provide any. We, as part of the conversation with the commissioner, these were added as a way to ameliorate the issue here.
Yes, we
Mr.
understand
Noria.
all this. Please listen, let's just, I think I'm going to move on to DOB because we're repeating ourselves. We know that you have these spaces outside that DOB does not consider believable solutions and even legal solutions under zoning. And it's looking for a way to know that the throughput into the only ways to get into the garage, which are 2 elevators, is not going to hold 10 cars up in the street waiting online to get into this now 113 space parking garage. That's what this is about.
Understood. And I just want to make sure. So the issue is whether or not they have the authority. And if they're saying that it's an issue of safety, we would like them to present that. But that's not what has been presented so far. It's that they're relying on this section, and then they're going to require these effectively reservoir spaces. And if that is not the case, the design, whether or not they're making these 90-degree turns, is something that we can address later. But we need to know that they have the authority to require these additional, to get them off.
Okay, that's fair.
We'll continue with the Department of Buildings. So Mr. Zoltan, are you ready to speak?
I am here.
Great.
Okay.
State your name, please.
Sure. Michael Zoltan on behalf of the Department of Buildings. So as was just stated, this is an appeal of a department determination that the proposed public parking garage containing accessory parking spaces did not comply with the zoning resolution. Specifically, whether the department has the authority to review the layout of an attended public parking garage with less than 300 square feet each. This was mostly just discussed, so I'm not going to belabor the point. In the appellant's last submission on August 19th, the appellant asked the board to decide only the narrow issue of whether any specific provision in the zoning resolution requires reservoir spaces for this garage. And if that's the only question, I think the board and the department agree that there's no specific provision that says this public parking garages needs X reservoir spaces. That's not the reason that they were suggested. They were suggested as a way, as I think we all understand, as a way to satisfy safety and maneuverability issues and access to the public parking garage. So turning to the specific provision, 36.521, I think there's been a lot of fair discussion about it. I think everyone is mostly on the same page here. The one or two things I would like to point out is that I don't think this is so much a legislative intent argument. I obviously agree that legislature and city planning wanted spaces that are accessible and maneuverable, and that is something that is required regardless of if it's in accordance with something promulgated by DOB or if it's just certified as attended. I think that's definitely the intent. However, I would argue that there's also some stated intent in this provision, or rather in the earlier in the chapter. So the general, in 3601 specifically. Let me pull it up. So 3601, which talks about the provisions that are about to follow, including 36.521, says the goal of what these provisions are trying to achieve, and they're trying to reduce traffic congestion caused by parking on the streets, to prevent substantial amounts of traffic from circulating in and parking on residential streets surrounding commercial centers, to provide for a higher standard of commercial development within the city, and thus to promote and protect public health, safety, and general welfare. So a reading of following provision, the instant 36.521, to read it that just because it is attended and certified as attended is enough. I did like the chair's hypothetical of if you put a beam in the middle and you technically are following the letter of the law, but it's utterly impractical and inaccessible. That would be ridiculous to read it just because it's certified as attended. So I think the reading of this specific provision, which is obvious that the goal is that 300 square feet is great, but you can reduce it if you are still promoting safety and accessibility and maneuverability. And if you have a design in a certain manner that is utterly inaccessible and cannot be used properly. Attendants are great. They're incredibly skilled. They can drive a lot better than I can and work with very small spaces. But if there's no room for them to move the car on that lowest level before it gets into the elevator, and the cars are necessarily going to be backing up onto the street. And that is something that the department is very concerned about. So I know there was a question about whether or not the department reviews these attended parking lots generally, and the answer is yes. They are always reviewed, even if they are certified as attended. I don't have a list of specific factors that are looked at, and I don't know if it's case specific based on different designs. But one of the things that is definitely reviewed and is the issue in this case is that we do not want cars queuing up into the street and backing up into the street and causing traffic. It's not safe, and it's definitely taking away from the goal of putting these cars off streets into public parking garages. I know, for example, there was a similarly designed one in Queens earlier this year that ran into a very similar issue. And in conversations, the applicant changed the plans and addressed the department's concerns and put a few reservoir spaces inside the building, so that there was room to ensure that the cars weren't backing into the street, but rather we're going to be waiting in the building before they are the keys are taken by the attendants and the valets. I agree that a good point that was missed in the papers is that the charter and the DOB code, the building code, the specifically 28103.8, the matters not provided for provision are appropriate and would be reasonable basis for requiring some sort of plans to provide adequate access and maneuverability for these attendants, that they can actually juggle the cars in a safe manner and not having them backing up onto the street. So I think those are accurate. I do think zoning, reading the provision rationally in a manner that providing attendance is not enough. You also have to provide something that is actually feasible. You have to have some space for the attendants to do their job. So I think both the code, the charter, and in some respect the zoning resolution do provide DOB to review for this issue. And while reservoir spaces themselves are not a requirement, they are more a means to an end. They were a suggestion in terms of how this can be addressed. But the second point is that the ones provided on the plans thus far are not sufficient. They're outside of a building, and there is that enclosure requirement of 32.412, and so that's the main issue, that they just don't comply with zoning. And then the practical issue of they're not accessible. They don't really solve the problem if they are in a way that the attendants or drivers on the street can't get to them. Then what are they really satisfying? The addition of the curb cut on the northwest, I think it was 28th, doesn't really, it's not accessible if it's that sharp 90-degree turn into a building. And the other ones are going to be blocked necessarily by the pickup and drop off spaces. As those people are waiting for the elevators, you can't access the other spaces. So although they are present on the plans, that's really it. They're just they're paper reservoir spaces that are not allowed by zoning, and they don't satisfy the harm that the reservoir spaces are trying to address. So I think that's mostly it. I did have a question. Commissioner Shibeta discussed a balancing test, and I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity on that in terms of what he was looking for.
I was referring to the applicant is relying on the text stating being clearly being clear, but the government and the Department of Buildings certainly has an obligation to set regulations down for public safety. And to what point does that start infringing on the private person's right, private person's rights? So I want you to, does that clarify my question?
I think so, a little bit. Are you looking for case law, or are you looking for just a line?
If you could find case law, which I'm certain there is case law on government's right to promote public safety, that would be helpful.
Okay.
I mean, just as a little help there, if you could find case law that cites to DOB charter and administrative code authority to look beyond existing laws and regulations in the interest of public safety, that would probably, so your search might be those two sections that I cited, wherever they were, section 646 in the charter and section 27-110 in the code. And maybe there are others, but I only scoured as deeply as I could scour. Maybe there are others where the Department of Buildings has invoked those issues to go further than what the zoning, for example, allows. I see Commissioner Sheta's hand up. I just want to say, add one thing. So what's a little confusing here is if we were to decide that the zoning resolution, the text of the resolution is clear, that it's an either or, we aren't being asked to decide because I don't think we need to. It's the Department of Buildings' own authority. But we aren't being asked to decide whether the Buildings Department has the authority to invoke, for example, these two provisions in the charter and the administrative code. I don't know if that's what you need from us. It was just a suggestion that your appeal to us was probably kind of in the wrong place. I don't disagree that the 3601 text has an intent, and the intent is to protect public safety. And so you could say that, this is my opinion, you could say that you should be looking at all of these provisions with the brush of, is this promoting public safety? And the answer is, when you have a 200 square foot, even a 300 square foot parking garage that has 7-foot high ceilings or 6.5 foot high ceilings that won't clear an SUV or something like that, obviously it's not meeting the intent, though it may be meeting the letter of the regulation, not well enough drafted. So that's something. So Commissioner Sheta?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm what I'm getting from the DOB. My understanding from DOB is that their request for the reservoir space is not just for reservoir space. It's for resolving issues that are relevant or related to the layout of the parking spaces inside. For me, it's kind of, yes, the zoning text is crystal clear, but there is a word there that we have all to agree that this word, the meaning of this word is satisfied, which is spaces. In order for me to consider, let's say we have 100 spaces inside, in order for me to consider them as parking spaces, there are certain requirements, it appears, by the DOB to consider these as spaces. like accessibility, interior maneuverability, and how this relates to the outside activity of the cars getting into that parking. And I believe this is what I mean by this is what I mean by considering the spaces inside as real spaces. So what is DOB is looking for here is not just reservoir spaces. It's some sort of a solution for an issue that's related to the interior layout of the parking garage. Am I getting this right?
Yes, it affects both. It's the accessibility to the spaces. If you can't, if just based on the layout specifically, and that includes the layout outside from the elevator to the street. Yes.
In other words, if somebody else come with the same exact outside exterior accessibility roads or access ways, but the interior design is a bit different or is different, you would say this is okay, but for the current application, you're saying that the interior design is not enough to consider it safe for the public.
I mean, if an alternative design was proposed with a totally different inside, it would be reviewed based on that. So I can't speak exactly to how it would be addressed, but the main concern here is, yes, it's outside. It's the entrance into the facility generally. That's what's causing the main issue.
Okay, thank you.
Because if I were to just look at the design of the building in an effort to try to help the architect a little bit, right? I know that the retail spaces are valuable. Again, I don't understand why the building is set back so far from the street line. If retail is valuable, you build to the street line. But if you move the elevators all the way to the back of the site, now you have an opportunity to roll in, I don't know what it is, 4 to 6 cars that are then, and even maybe have a covering, so it might even be 8 cars that stand on line waiting to get into the elevator lift. So it seems like kind of this firm, and since the elevator lift doesn't go all the way up the building, you're not talking about a terrible core and a terrible location. There's a lobby in a different place. So if you pulled it all the way in, it seems like that could solve it. It's true you would lose some retail, but why not build the building forward? Unless I don't know about zoning in that case. Yes, Commissioner Shanda. You have to, yeah, I recognized you. Commissioner Shanda, you have to unmute yourself though.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think there's just one thing we need to be careful. I mean, there are sites, there are very large sites where you do have a parking garage and you do have the reservoir spaces that's on the outside of the parking garage. So it is allowed reservoir spaces to be outside open to the sky, like when you have a driveway that leads to the parking garage. However, this is not that situation. So I think we need to be just careful when we say that the reservoir spaces is outside. In this case, it's outside, not just because it's outside, it could be covered also, but the fact that the way it's laid out and the fact that the maneuverability of this reservoir spaces is almost impossible, especially that right angle turn, it just is impossible. So, I just want, I don't care whether it's on the exterior or the interior, even if it was a double walled space, you couldn't make that maneuverability work. That's all I get at.
No, it's not that you can't, I mean, for example, let's say you had it on the outside, then you have screening. There's no room for screening.
You couldn't. That's what I'm saying. I mean, with the screening, you couldn't. This layout only works when you're relying on using some portion of the sidewalk to help you make that turn. Sorry, I think Mr. Duranzo has been wanting to speak for some time.
Okay,
so
go ahead, sir. Mr. Duranzo, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself though. Now, yeah.
Fantastic. So it seems to me that I wanted to raise a couple of items. The location of these reservoir spaces, since our position from the beginning as the architects was that they were not needed. They were actually suggested by the very commissioner directly. The location, the layout, we were the ones who suggested to add a second curb cut, but that's besides the point. So because there are great legal minds around this table, I just want to make a matter of practicality. And so would it maybe raise the following question? Would it be logical to say if the reservoir spaces are not required, which seems to be an agreed upon point, they don't need to be 10. They can be a lesser number. No. Okay, I see already a commissioner waiting.
No, I think that's not a discussion before us. It's the reservoir question. It's a different matter. The reason that I think this goes back to the charter issue and what is in DOB's purview. If DOB thinks for the safety and the operation of purposes, it needs certain amount of reservoir spaces, it's DOB's determination. The zoning is not calling out, and that's not before us. That's how I see this. And, you know, as Madam Chair pointed out, this layout, if you're proposing a retail use that is surrounded by parking, I'm not going to that restaurant. I'm sorry.
No,
I don't want to be surrounded, right? And you could achieve it in a different way. You could have the same, you just flip it on the interior of it. You flip this whole reservoir spaces on the interior with an entrance from 21st, and it's inside the building, and the garage is still where it is, and it's at the edge of the property, and you have enough space within it, and you can still provide everything that is below it and have a beautiful open retail space or a commercial space on the ground floor that has frontage on both the streets. So you can achieve it. So I'm not sure why you're fighting this and achieve what you want.
Commissioner, I wish I had been given the openness you're offering today. We were simply trying to accommodate Commissioner Derek Lee in this new layout. As a matter of fact, while I understand that there is that the DOB should have a certain leeway in evaluating this for the sake of the safety of the community, we presented this project strong of the interpretation of the zoning resolutions. So I think that this conversation is sort of geared towards the qualifications of the reservoir spaces when we have always maintained that they were not needed. But if they are needed and we have decreased, the other point was if we have decreased the number of spaces from 150 to 113, maybe the reservoir spaces should be a lesser amount, and maybe, and obviously as architects, we are going to, listen to every suggestion made so far by yourself and by Madam Chair. So, at this point, those are the two items I wanted to offer.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate very much. Yes, I think, has DOB finished their presentation? Yes.
Yeah, I think mostly, unless there are further questions.
Okay, mostly as in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think finished unless there are further questions.
Okay, Mr. Noriega, yeah.
So I know we keep talking about reservoir spaces, but the real issue is whether or not DOB has the authority to impose additional regulations based on safety or whatnot. That has not been presented. I know the chair mentioned it in the review session, but if that is the issue, perhaps DOB can present that. And we can certainly present case law why we believe that that is not the case to impose additional requirements.
In the interest of the developer and the architect who have been dealing with this for 3 years, do you really want to do that as opposed to go back and propose to DOB an alternate design that simply addresses a believable way of handling the parking in a way that DOB feels confident is not going to end up with 10 cars parked on the street while they're waiting to get into the elevator? You really want to fight this out about whether DOB has the charter authority and the administrative code authority to make determinations in interest of public safety?
Well,
I wouldn't do that.
I think the issue is that we have been fighting that out for over 2 years. We have, as the architect has mentioned, we've made rearrangements of the parking and whatnot. We've reduced the number of spaces, but it is based on something that we don't know. And we're saying that if they want to proceed and say that it's based on 36.521, we don't believe that they have any authority to. And if I just may touch on, because the statement was made that the legislative intent is clearly that this is what it requires to allow the DOB authority to review these sort of things. I would completely disagree, and as presented, and I know the chair mentioned this before, that this language has been there since 1961. But prior to that, there were a couple of different drafts of proposed zoning language. First in 1950.
Right, I'm sorry, it's 12:15. we've read all of your papers, so please don't go up to the 1958 zoning resolution, okay? So proposed resolution. So what I would like to suggest to the architect and to DOB is, in the interest of resolving this situation as opposed to duking it out about what the zoning resolution says, that the architect goes to, I'm not sure who the last reviewer was, either Derek Lee or Marshall Kaminer, with our instructions. Work with the architect and figure out something that isn't specifically reliant on this word reservoir space, like kind of get off of that terminology, but instead on the idea of cars need to come in with an adequate throughput, and that DOB is not comfortable that the elevators, nor am I, because we've seen so many and they don't have that kind of throughput, that the elevators are capable of rotating and returning so quickly, and that maybe the solution is, as Vice Chair Shanda suggested, or I suggested, that you pull the cars into the building sooner and rearrange your retail space so it's more voluminous and therefore makes more money for the client, et cetera, et cetera. Pull it in from one way or the other, and maybe that will be adequate to persuade DOB that there isn't going to be a terrible pileup on the street. So to get off this language of reservoir spaces that seems to be like a trigger for, wait a minute, the zoning resolution doesn't require it. No, the buildings department is concerned about safety. Address that concern with good architecture. And I really recommend that that be the approach, and maybe you don't need us anymore. Okay?
And Antonio, perhaps you can chime in on this. My understanding is that is exactly what we've been doing for the past 2 years. And we haven't come to a conclusion that is satisfactory.
To be a moderator between DOB in the design department, that's really not our job, though, you know, that we love to get into design questions.
I 100% agree that this is not a design question. We do not want you to opine on the design. The question is, does DOB have the authority to impose additional regulations such as reservoir spaces or whatever it may be?
So from my perspective, I would say that it may not have it arguably has the authority under the zoning resolution with respect to 3601, but it certainly has the authority under the city charter and the admin code to verify safety. And that's kind of a silly determination for the Board of Standards and Appeals to make, because it says it right there in the charter and the admin code, which, by the way, is regulated by DOB. So their very own admin code. Yeah, Commissioner Sheta had his hand up first, and Commissioner Shabeta next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. To DOB, can you provide us with like cases where you haven't asked for reservoir space to be provided, so we can take a look at that? If possible, you have the layouts, we can like take a look at them, and probably you can give them to the applicant so they understand what the issue exactly, or like the chair said.
Yeah, I see.
It might be,
Stop doing that.
you may need to communicate, the applicant, you may need to communicate with DOB and understand what their issues are and get them resolved, and instead of like wasting your time.
So
Yeah.
can I just interrupt just 1 second? This word reservoir spaces is this hot button item. The zoning resolution requires reservoir spaces in certain situations, and we see them required in situations where, for instance, we're demanding it if you're going to come to us for a parking special permit. And when city planning issues parking special permits, they're 100% required by the zoning. But the zoning resolution doesn't per se require reservoir spaces in every situation. So it doesn't state that in this zoning district for this kind of a building, reservoir spaces are required. So I don't want the DOB to be spending hours looking at when they didn't or did require it. The question here is, for me, do they have the authority to demand a safe parking garage? And if they don't think it's safe, then do they have the authority to say to the architect, redesign? And the things that we're coming up with, DOB, the architects who and engineers who work at DOB, who are the commissioners and others, say the thing that comes to mind is a reservoir space. But there are other ways of approaching it, right? Using a different kind of a mechanism that has a proven 2-second throughput. We've actually seen those rotating, the turntables have an amazing throughput. So in that case, we saw one project where they drive onto the turntable and whoosh, like in a second and a half, it's gone, right? If they proposed something like that, then DOB might have had a different response, but they didn't. So I don't want to get into, DOB doing thousands of hours of research, and I'm not sure to what end. Commissioner Shibeta?
Well, I think what I said has been said, but I think to Council Noriega and Mr. Oranzo, I think that it seems that working with DOB at this moment might be more cost efficient than fighting the argument on the statute. And I think also you have an opportunity where we intend to have a resolution on this case rather quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that your efforts now will be more successful than they have been in the last 2 years.
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right. Any last minute? I'm going to go to the public, even though this is an appeal. Can you show that? Thank you. So are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this? For those of you who are in the attendees, if this is something you want to speak on, please raise your hand. There's one person whose last three digits on their phone number is 741. Do we know who that is?
I don't have the list.
Mr.
Yes,
Stein?
I believe that is for 2017 317 BZ.
Okay, so anyone there who might anyone else on this list who might be interested in speaking, please put your hand up. Otherwise, we're inviting members of the public to call in.
This is 2019 198 40-17 28th Avenue, Queens.
Okay, good. All right, so we would like DOB and the appellant to respond to our questions, comments, but in the meantime, I would really prefer, with the sort of direction that we're giving the appellant and DOB to get this worked out. Maybe they can work it out during the time. So I would say maybe 6 weeks to submit, and that way you have enough time to really work out the issues. I mean, you could be showing DOB a variety of sketches. How about this? How about this? How about that? And that way maybe you'll have a better chance in getting a response, okay? As opposed to the thing that works the worst is DOB says, give us reservoir spaces. Then you go away for 2 months and you come up with not a very persuasive idea about reservoir spaces. And then they say no. And then you say, okay, well, how about this? No. So instead, how about come up with several ideas for how you will move the cars inside the building, maybe modify the shape of your building to accommodate any kind of loss to retail, and go to DOB and say, I came up with 10 solutions. How about this? How about this? How about this? Et cetera, et cetera. And maybe you'll come to a reasonable solution and you'll withdraw the appeal. Just saying, okay? All right then, so I'm writing 6 weeks to submit, okay?
We'll set up a schedule. We'll set up a schedule.
So yeah, 6 weeks to submit the initial, okay? And then a briefing schedule. All right, thanks, Tony. Okay, thank you very much for calling in. Your participation is appreciated.
Next item is 2017-317BZ, 1693 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn. This is Fayan, I think. Oh, Amanda. Barbara. Myron. Okay, do we have everybody?
Yes, if you're ready, please speak.
Okay, so I need to swear you in. Raise your right hands. Sorry. Right hands. Okay, if you do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this board, and to respond honestly to board member questions?
I do.
Yes. Mr. Rothkrug? Mr. Rothkrug, could you respond?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
Go ahead.
Chair,
Go ahead.
thank you. And I think we're on good afternoon. Richard Lobel of Sheldon Lobel PC for the applicant. I'm joined by Amanda Ionati of my office, as well as various members of the applicant team. The goal of our attendance and submissions and this hearing today for us is not to engage in a prolonged discussion on all of the items submitted to the board, because we have listened to the board's executive session and understand the nature of the comments and that some of those are entirely valid. What we would hope to do today would be to discuss what we think are some discrete points regarding the submission of some of the evidence, to modify our submissions in accordance with the board's comments, and to proceed in the next submission to cater that submission to what the board has stated. So with regards to the legal background of the case, I would only make 3 discrete points, as I know that the environmental consultants, engineers, as well as the financial analysts have some separate issues which they wanted to clarify with the appropriate members of the board. But from my standpoint, I just wanted to talk about 3 things. The first was site uniqueness. And while the board may have issues with the financial hardship and translation of that financial hardship from uniqueness, I just wanted to say that in our mind, there is no question that the site is unique. The commissioners have discussed the fact that there are 7 other sites within the study area that have the same condition. And it's important to note that that site study area was of the surrounding 600 feet. So we looked at over 260 properties. So this triangular lot condition of which we complain is basically one with, it's about 2.9% of the lots in this area are burdened by this condition. And so I believe it's Douglas and Association versus Civic Association versus Klein 51 NY 2nd 963, which talks about the fact that uniqueness does not mean you are the only site so burdened, but that if the relief requested was generally applied to the area and to all of these sites so affected, it would essentially result in a rezoning of the area. That's not what we seek here. In fact, of the 7 sites other than our site that are reviewed, 3 of those sites have either non-conforming uses or non-complying bulk. So they already exceed the parameters of the zoning resolution as requested by us. And one of the other sites received a BSA variance. So that essentially means that of those 7 sites, 4 of them benefit from some non-compliance, non-conformance, or indeed a BSA variance. And so again, there will be discussion around the unique conditions, how that translates into a hardship, whether or not the board feels that is so justified, but the fact of the uniqueness we feel is merited here. The second comment we would make would be with regards to the cost estimates. And
So actually, but before you go there, because the uniqueness, just because you're unique doesn't mean the uniqueness presents a hardship. So if we gave you uniqueness, where's the hardship related to the shape of the site, right?
Sure. So again, I feel that a lot of the board's discussion was on apples to apples. I could not agree more. I think there was some, the way that it was conceived on our side was that the as of right plans were actually ones that were submitted to DOB. So the, the finishes, everything, all of that was actually as was in those as of right plans that were approved. So I think that needs to translate into an apples and apples conversations with, for example, the as of right hypothetical and all the other scenarios that were submitted. So Chair, without belaboring that, because again, I think that the financial analysis and the cost estimation needs to address these issues specifically. I would note that there is some differential between, for example, the core, the perimeter, percentage of perimeter wall, and the cost of construction, which vary between a triangular site and a rectangular site. And I know that Commissioner Sheta discussed this in terms of somehow the applicant trying to portray this somehow gaming the system. He referred to the word game. We do not, that is not what we seek to do here. There is there's a long line of case precedent at BSA, which establishes that these site conditions can contribute to these specific cost differentials. So, whether or not, what the actual numbers are, and we agree, again, we need to go back and correct this. I don't want to belabor this, but like the very fact of a differential between the percentage of core in a triangular lot versus that in a hypothetical rectangular lot, it's there. It's an existing number. And again, I understand, Chair, we need to tighten up the numbers. That's clear, but the very fact of a differential, we seek to establish that and to bring that out in our submission. I mean, it's there. So again, reduction in the proposal, we understand that, but we just wanted to establish that first of all, there is no game being played here. The fact of the applicants approaching the DOB and attempting to do this as of right, again, sits as a testament that we're here for a reason. But we will be submitting on that, and we will better establish for the board what the nature of the differential is.
Before you proceed with the submission for the next submission, I just want to clarify that the word game, when I used it during the executive session, I used it in the context of increasing the remediation cost for item number 4.
Yes.
The last submission, that was 78,000, and in this submission, it became 125
Yes.
because other items went down. Can you give me one reason for increasing item number 4, which is the SSDS sub-slab depressurization system and the vapor barrier? Why was it 78, the last submission, and this submission, and when it went up to 125?
Yes.
This is one thing. The other thing,
yes,
I need you to explain to me, right now you're claiming 2 pillars of your hardship. One of them is the shape, and one of them is the remediation. In your view, which item is the major one? Is it the shape? Or I need an answer for it. Just pick one and say this is
sure.
my major hardship.
So we looked at the same numbers as the commissioner pointed out upon your markup of the financial costs. We saw the dollar amount that was devoted to the remediation. We saw the dollar amount that was devoted to the shape of the property and the relative difference between those numbers. I can't give you an answer right now because I understand and agree that the hypothetical that set forth a basement needs to be translated into the other numbers, including the as of right. And so that number, that differential will come down because it costs less to produce a shorter building. So Commissioner Sheta, I understand the point. I understand the board's prior points with regards to adjustment of that number. And so I'll be able to answer that upon a reduction of that number.
Are you saying that your engineer jacked up the 78,000 for the remediation to 125 without knowing the reason, and now you need to like go back and research it and submit it to us?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. In fact, that same number that appeared to Commissioner Sheta was also obviously apparent to the entire applicant team. And so the environmental the environmental consultant and engineer are able to address that with Commissioner Sheta at this hearing. So I absolutely demand that they address that. It's an important, it's too big a hole to allow that to sit. So why did the cost go up? We all discussed that internally. They will discuss that on the record. But we just basically want to establish that the fact of these different costs exist. And we believe the fact of the uniqueness exists. As the chair says, it can't just be uniqueness, it has to be contributing to a financial hardship. There is one, we will establish that. But we also want, if this premise is, approach the board, and we approach the board as professionals under oath with materials that are certified as to their truth and completeness. Here's my admission. Commissioner Sheta looked at all the costs, and we appreciate, again, the professionalism and the time and energy that the board put into reviewing these submissions. But like, as an example, when we look at the underground storage tanks and the cost of removal, the truth is, yes, the number that Commissioner Sheta looked at, the $50,000 number, actually did not reflect the cost estimate that was received by the applicant. The cost estimate that was received by the applicant was actually over $30,000 greater than the $50,000 cost that was put into this report. Now, why do I mention this? I mention this because, again, we're under.
I didn't hear the last portion. You were breaking. I'm sorry.
Okay, sure. The cost estimate received by the applicant was over $80,000 for removal of the tanks. My applicant, as a matter of professional responsibility, reduced that number to $50,000. Commissioner Sheta said that $50,000 is not the case, and you cited your own experience as an engineer. My point is that we deal with facts and we deal with numbers and we deal with testimony. And so I would rather be in a position to submit additional proposals on the record from licensed contractors who remove these tanks rather than rely on your cost estimate and your personal experience as an engineer. I feel that that is establishing that on the record. We're going to submit the fact that the cost estimate that we have was for $85,000. It's just that I want to, when you go over line item by line item in these costs in the environmental remediation, we need to be able to respond to those. We need to be able to respond to those on the record with certified documentation. We will do so, but at some point, I think we have to be, the board needs to accept that we're under the same standards as any applicant, and in that we're putting forth solid factual information.
Okay, but and I'm going to recognize Commissioner Otley Brown. I just want to say one small thing, which is that you can get estimates, but we don't necessarily have to accept the estimates. Just like when you see Commissioner Otley Brown looks at comparables, and maybe they're based on data that's out there through ready reports and things like that, but she may say, yeah, but I don't accept these comparables because they aren't comparables, or the cost estimator isn't reflective of industry standard. And this is our experience with industry standard, because as you know, we see so many of these. Commissioner Otley Brown.
I just wanted to say that if you wanted to point out that there's a hardship from the shape, when you have a hypothetical as of right that actually differs from the as of right by reducing it by a floor and building out to the full lot, as opposed to going up to a third floor in the as of right, you're kind of covering up the message you want to send, because you're not really clearly pointing out that this shape is impacted by the lot shape. And
Right.
what ends up happening is we end up looking at it and going, well, it's clear it's going to be more expensive if you're going up to another floor. You're better off, if you want to highlight the impact of the shape, stay as true to your as of right in your hypothetical as of right, so that this way we don't have any other option but to be led to your conclusion. So no other question in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're trying to say.
And
agree.
and if we just talk about that, if you look at the drawings, and this is one of those things where, yes, I agree that you have to deal with facts presented to you, but when the architect submits to you a set of drawings and you see that, for example, the hypothetical drawing has a terrible layout for retail space, right? Or for the basement floor, well, it's both actually. The cellar, the basement, and the first floor, well, the basement is really the first floor, so that's the other thing, has a terrible layout where there's a section of it that is so neck down as to be useless. And then you look at the actual as of right, and you've got sort of this glorious retail space with all the space between the two cores. How can you, with a straight face, say that it's disadvantaged? It's actually the base of the triangle is doing you an enormous service according to that hypothetical selected. So, you know, in your place, I would have said to the architect, wrong hypothetical. Pick a different hypothetical, move the core from here to there, make the frontage the same exact one as what you've got on the as of right. But the problem is, if you don't do that, if you aren't critical of your own consultant's submissions, we
Right.
review it and we ask all those questions. And then it becomes too late in a certain way because our opinion's already been tainted by what we've seen.
Right, Chair. We understand the apples to apples conversation is critical, and we need to make those changes. And we, you know, it's impossible for the board to review the evidence critically without being able to understand that distinction. And so that is indeed the primary focus of our conversation with our architect. We can't, the numbers right now, as the board has said, it's practically premature to look at this without a more, you know, a more comparable layout. So we understand that, and that's the case. And I think that's why we don't want to enter into a prolonged discussion of much of the evidence, because we get that point. We understand, we heard the board, it's correct. The only thing that we're seeking to do is where we view the board as being, as having a different interpretation on certain factors with regards to our review, particularly number one, on environmental remediation, what the cost, like the cost differential that is set out by the commissioners versus what we used, as well as, because it's important, the increase in that environmental remediation number. That's important for us to address right now, because we want to start from the same premise. We don't want to waste anyone's time. We want to move forward. That's number one. And I think that could be a productive discussion, not long, but productive. And then the second is with regards to, we understand the physical layout and the apples to apples discussion and the fact that we need to make those scenarios look more similar. But with regards to the use themselves and some of the decisions that were made as far as, well, you could have just had a full commercial floor, or why did you segregate the second floor into two community facility uses? There's certain discussions that we have internally about, okay, the differential as far as market value here is going to more than compensate for the extra core, for example. So that's one that we would have Ms. Cohen address with Commissioner Otley Brown. So that's all we wanted to talk about.
Okay. So let's do.
We've discussed this last hearing, and we made it, I believe I made it clear, and I recall Commissioner Brown made it clear that the shape of the site is not imposing hardship, because it's not preventing you from using the floor area that you can use. This is number one. And number two, like the chair mentioned, the base of the triangle where you're building like putting the majority of your building is not actually giving you any hardship designing this building from the architectural preview. So I'm not sure which direction we're heading here. Are we gonna resubmit again on the shape and claim that the shape is still imposing hardship?
Yes,
if this
because
is
we
gonna
disagree.
happen, I'm not gonna look at it.
We disagree with that premise. There's a long line of case law before the board, as well as on our site, that a triangular lot can contribute to the hardship of the site.
It can, and sometimes we see them. And I can think of the Avenue Z case where it was a skinny base and a really, really long triangle, and you could barely fit anything in it. And that one was an excellent poster child for a triangle, right? We also have the Franklin Street case, the little two bow ties, perfect poster child for a variance. But we also have many others where indeed the site was, this is not triangle, actually, it's trapezoid. So we have many other sites where we had trapezoids and we said, sorry, we don't see the problem with your trapezoid. It's got a wide base and it stays wide for the majority of the site and puts you in an advantage over other triangular sites, and was mentioned by Commissioner Shabeta, I think. There are other ones that have that are in a worse situation than this one. So I don't want to belabor this. If you choose to continue on that, I think you're going to frustrate everyone, because everyone already said that they didn't think that the size of the shape of the lot was driving the hardship, and that your focus, and we said that at the last hearing, that your focus should be on environmental. And I don't want to belabor this too much, because Commissioner Shabeta went through quite literally with circles and arrows on the screen and showed where the questionable sums were and so on. So rather than have one of your experts talk to us here about it, they should be submitting a response in writing with respect to those questions about environmental remediation, because at the moment it seems as if, well, for one, even if it were 360,000, which it's not, because we saw there was a miscalculation at the very least on the cubic yardage for removal. And so even if we were to accept the numbers in terms of cost per whatever for engineers or whatever, you're still talking about a very limited amount of money required for the remediation. And if you're talking about a standard site where every single site puts down a water vapor, a vapor barrier, and every single site, no matter what, has some layer of some kind of contamination on it at a minimal level and has to, so if you just compared it to a standard, actual standard site, as opposed to the pure, clean hypothetical, every site in the city is confronted with some amount of contamination.
Even if it doesn't, Chair, even if the site doesn't have contamination and it has elevated groundwater table, they tend to put vapor barrier is used to block water vapor from entering through the cracks in the lowest floor slab. It's not needed just for contamination. It could be used during the absence of contamination.
All right, so there you see the thinking. Like, if you're really talking about a hypothetical site, it should be a hypothetical actual New York City site where there's all of these requirements. It can't be so clean as the driven snow in, someplace in the mountains in New Hampshire, right?
Yeah, sure. I don't know what the zoning board's like in New Hampshire, but I may try to find out soon. But I will say,
and I just want to add something. What is driving this variance is this hardship, this claimed hardship. It's not the remediation. If you look at the construction cost itself, that this remediation is about what? You're claiming 350 grand for the cleaning up the site. If you look at the construction cost, who gave the construction cost estimator the authority to translate from a foundation system that cost 36 cubic yards to another foundation system that cost 325 cubic yards? This is more than 10 times. Why? Who gave him that authority to just write off 35 cubic yards that cost peanuts and replace this? If this kind of behavior doesn't stop, we as a board need to do something. It cannot be like that. These guys submit under oath and testify under oath. That's not acceptable, period.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you.
Coordination issue again, where you as the applicant's representative need to be looking at all the work of consultants and make sure it all makes sense, right?
We spoke about it last hearing, Chair, and we have a case that's identical to this. Same exact behavior from same exact team that we mentioned the same exact comments.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So again, we understand the board's comments. The fact of here you have the fact of the removal of USTs, which is, again, while other cases have discussed levels of contamination, you can't really argue with the fact that the USTs are at the site, that they will need to be removed, that there will be some remediation associated with that. Again, we don't want to belabor this. We really would actually relish the opportunity for the professionals to discuss discrete points with the board and move it along.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to limit, because we have another case and we haven't heard it. I'm gonna have to limit any kind of comments from the professionals who might want to speak to not more than 3 minutes. And then I'm gonna ask that we move to the public and that you respond to everything else in writing, okay? Because we
Yes,
have
sir.
another case and the instruction earlier was respond to us in writing and instead there's testimony.
Understood, Chair. Thank you. And I would ask the environmental consultants to speak first solely because of that differential in the remediation costs, which we'd like to address off the bat.
State your name when you speak.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hiram Rothkrew. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let me just go down the bullet points with the board quickly.
But remember, we're giving you 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay, so let me shoot this all out there. It's not 500 cubic yards, it should be 12,500 cubic yards, which is 2,500 times 5 feet down. I don't know why your records show 500, but it should be 2,500.
No,
That's what it says. That's what it says. It says
It's 2,500 square feet times 5 feet of depth. So it's 12,500 square feet divided by 27 is 463.
Sorry, wait a second. So this is the thing about coordination. If there are typos, we read the typos and rely on it, right?
It's not a typo.
It's not a typo. I
says-
went to the site and
Yeah.
I looked at the area that's been excavated. That's why when I saw this, actually, I have decided to go to the site and visit and see how much excavation was done. And I did look at the pictures as well. The excavated area was in the south next to the existing building. The width of that excavated area was about 10 feet, and it was excavated, and the length was probably less than 50 feet. So that total square footage that's put in the submission, which it says 500 square feet, is correct. It's not a typo. And that depth, if you look at the pictures with the guy, the excavator operator standing in the pit, the depth tends to be like 5 feet, about right, about what's mentioned in the submission. So 5 times 500 is 2,500 cubic foot. If you divide this by 27, the cubic yardage is slightly less than 100. It's not 25, it's not 460 cubic yard. It's less than
463 cubic yards. And we disagree, Commissioner, and we'll just have to document it more to the board after.
You're gonna have to show us the new math you're using, because when you multiply 27 or divide by 27, that's the number you get. So you're gonna have to show us.
2,500 at 5 foot depth is 12,000
2,500 square feet.
of impacted soil.
Are you suggesting that?
I'm suggesting that there's 2,500 square feet of impacted soil. But
Yeah,
let me go to the,
Your measurement is cubic yards, right? That's how you're charging, by the cubic yard.
That's right, 2,500 square feet times 5 foot depth divided by
You
27.
already got it's not 2,500 square feet. You said it's 10 by 50. You said it's in the materials, it says it's a 500 square foot by 5 foot deep place.
We'll get back to the board.
I'm sorry, Chair. Do you
Maybe they
agree
need
that these tanks, the 3 tanks, are 6 by 4?
Encased in cement.
Yes, but the
We
actual
failed to
steel
mention.
tank, I'm talking about the actual steel tank is 6 by 4. Do you agree?
You know, I could produce everything in writing to the board
Yes, please.
if it's easier than going on, because
I suggest you do that.
there
Let's
is
go.
still a lot of bullet points, including just to mention that the reason why the cost of the vapor barrier went up is because the site needs a totally engineered and designed sub-slab depressurization system. That's not an option, it's a requirement from the DEP and OER. So that's why
Can you give me
it's
that
not
writing from
an
them?
option. It's not an option, it's a requirement. So leaving on that, I'll, and then on the boring logs, by the way, you read the boring logs long, because after it says end of boring on the same line, it says advanced, which it advanced it down to a groundwater sample. But I'd like to address everything in writing.
What is advanced? That advanced means the well was advanced. It's not the boring. I know how to read boring logs well. It says end of boring is end of boring. What's advanced is the well. And you could, if you have a boring that's 50 feet, you could advance the well to 10 feet or to 50 feet, but you cannot advance it to 50 feet and 6 inches because it's not possible.
Done.
Okay, I think we've heard you understand, you listen to and listen again to the review session and respond to those comments one by one, okay?
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on. Who else did you want to have speak, Mr. Lobel?
Barbara Cohen was going to address the financial issue.
Okay, quickly, you have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Yeah, I'm not a fighter. No, I'm fine with including the lobby area in terms of adding that to generate more revenue. That's fine. Just a comment regarding soft costs, just in general. Soft costs, many of them are related to both the development costs, construction, and site values. So there's a relationship there. So discharging soft costs altogether is not possible. Yes, there was a typo that in terms of the environmental, and but then it was okay in the pro forma. And I do think, although I do a little bit of it on page 3, the issue of the shape and line by line in terms of the construction costs does need to get explained further. And then lastly, I guess, is the issue of what plans we come back to and how the as of right is done, and the impact of whether what the uses are, so that if it's community facility, there's a marketability discussion to be had in terms of building a community facility on spec versus having a tenant in hand versus doing a fully commercial, which I know is related to the triggering of parking. I mean, those are sort of, I think, some of the little bits and pieces. But sure, I'm subject to whatever changes occur by in terms of environmental and in terms of the plans and in terms of the construction. And I'm the last one in the loop, so I'll respond as they come to me.
Okay, Commissioner Otley Brown, did you want to add anything to that? You're muted.
No, I think the biggest issues are Shetta's issues in this, because my issues are more related to the overall macro issue of whether this site deserves a variance and whether or not the hardship has actually been proven. So, but his issues concerning the site value, concerning the soft costs are, his issues, and he has to determine how he wants that resolved.
Okay.
So I defer to him.
Okay, thank you. All right, then, I'd like to go to the public. Thanks. So if there's anybody who is currently in the waiting room who would like to speak on this case.
2017, 317, the 169, 1693 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn.
Then please raise your hand. Is there a way to raise hand? It's a star. How do you do raise hand?
If you're a member of the public calling in by telephone, please press *9.
But otherwise, if you're a Zoom participant, then you can raise your hand using the little feature in the lower right-hand corner. So we're inviting members of the public to call in. The number is on the screen, 646-558-8656, meeting ID number 998-5139, 3106. And in the meantime, I'll ask about how much time the team needs to respond, but I caution you not to focus on the site, on the shape of the site, because you have no commissioners on board with this and you will just frustrate them. And by the way, the more materials you submit to us, the more we have to review. And then that's also frustrating because the collective has, as far as I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, decided that the shape of the site cannot be driving this hardship because we don't see it. Okay, so how much time do you need for submission?
Chair, we would just say two things. The first is that, just to clear the record, I know that Commissioner Sheta had inquired at a site visit from a neighbor saying that they did not receive notice. I'd note that that individual is unidentified and, you know, is not certified. We have submitted to the board evidence that we duly notified in accordance with the board's regulations. So I just wanted to clear that up. The second is that with regards to the comments and the submission, we feel that 2 months would be sufficient. And we understand that the size and shape of the lot is not the primary factor here. You know, to the extent we'll take those comments back, but you know, we do feel it is a factor. It may be a minor factor. We do not wish to bring the board evidence that is not you know, compelling in this regard. So again, I think most of this will derive from the environmental factors, which will be substantiated by our consultants. So,
But I do want to underscore that, as Commissioners Sheta and Otley Brown were pointing out, you have a 0.75 increase or $700,000 increase claimed on the shape of the lot. And so when that carries forward into as of right, hypothetical, all of that stuff,
yes.
then that becomes frustrating because we see the number still there when all we want to know is what does the environmental cost do to your as of right project? And therefore, what's the minimum variance necessary, assuming one is earned or deserving, what would be the minimum variance necessary? And clouding it with shape of lot argument will be frustrating. And I have to say, we don't have the tolerance for one more of these. This is the last submission. Either you make your case or you don't. And I think that, so that's my
Okay, Chair.
recommendation, okay?
We'd like 2 months.
And please, the cost for the as of right should be based on the drawings submitted to the DOB.
Mhm.
No more like authoring a foundation plan and base the construction cost on it. If you have 35 cubic yards in that foundation plan, use them. Do not use 400.
Mhm. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
with respect to the board, it's 1 o'clock and we haven't taken a break. Can we maybe take a 15-minute break so that we can finish before the 2 o'clock? And maybe a little break before that. Okay, so 15-minute break, come back at basically 1:15. It's not quite 15 minutes, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners can hear, please come back.
I'm here.
I'm here.
Great.
Here.
Great. Mr. Motley Brown? Oh, I think Commissioner Shabeta, are you here? Yeah, you're here.
I'm here in case you.
Yeah, I see you. Okay, thanks. All right, ready to go.
Okay, this is the Board of Standards and Appeals public hearing for August 25th, 2020, 10 a.m. session. Resume with the last case, 2019-265 BZ, 35 Giffords Lane, Staten Island.
It's the last case of the morning session.
Morning, yes, sorry.
Okay. Mr. Rosenberg, can you hear? Are you?
Yes, I'm here, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Williams, Mr. Parker, and who else?
And Pastor Gary Comas is on as well.
Okay.
You can see him on video.
Okay, everyone will raise their right hands. And do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this board and to respond honestly to board member questions?
Yes.
You can put your hand down, Mr. Comas.
You just say yes, you agree? Oh, unmute yourself, Pastor. Oh, never mind.
Still muted.
That's
Sorry.
still muted.
Yes, I do.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parker.
Okay, proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. David Rosenberg of Sheldon Lobel PC on behalf of Faith Community Church. We heard the comments of the board at the review session earlier this morning. I'm joined by Pastor Gary Comas of Faith Community Church, as well as Jeffrey Parker, the project architect, and Kevin Williams of Equity Environmental, the environmental consultant, who will be able to talk to more of the issues raised by the board. As a preliminary matter, I wanted to discuss a few of the things that were raised at the review session. First, with respect to the chain link fence and barbed wire. In speaking with the applicant after that, it should not have been there. There seems to be some confusion about which of the chain link fence on the site belongs to the applicant and which has been placed there by either the neighboring property or by the Staten Island Rail. In any event, any chain link fences or barbed wire that is applicant owned and on the applicant's property will be removed and replaced with something that's more respectful of the neighborhood.
So when we say that, we're talking about the metal picket fence because that's what's shown on the renderings. So not another version of chain link fence. It's a residential district. Okay.
Understood.
Mhm.
Further, with respect to the vehicular egress on Sampson, the corner there of Sampson and Lamoka Avenue, in speaking with the project team, we will submit revised plans that show a collapsible bollard that can be used, that our office has seen on some other projects, that will ensure that that means of egress can only be used by pedestrians or used to enter by emergency vehicles as necessary, but cannot become a regular vehicular
So,
access.
Mr. Rosenberg, I want to hold off on that one. I'm going to wait to hear from our own fire department. I'm not persuaded this entrance is needed at all. And collapsible bollards are exactly that, designed to collapse and never be resurrected. And so it's a way to make it available all the time, much to the disappointment and chagrin of the people who are living on Sampson and Lamoka. So yeah, Commissioner Shanda?
And I'm also not sure why they should be made available for pedestrian access, because most of the access, I mean, that would also lead to then vehicles coming and dropping somebody off and then moving away. That is exactly what we are trying to avoid. We want to retain the Sampson Street as a residential, Sampson Avenue, sorry. So I think your primary pedestrian access, based on all the analysis you have shown, if they're coming from the parking lot or from the subway station or from the bus, will be from Giffords Lane. So this entrance should not be looked as a primary entrance. I think that's really what you're hearing. It should not be looked at as a primary entrance, either for pedestrian or for vehicle. If you need to use it for emergency, again, if FDNY thinks that's necessary, then it should be, and then there are other ways of accommodating it and not through a designated driveway.
And Vice Chair, I think that with this, I know that the congregation security team has thoughts about this, but as the chair mentioned, we will wait to hear from the fire department, which we have not yet heard on this issue from the fire department.
Correct. Okay, continue.
Separately, with respect to the planting that was shown in the changes, in particular on at the last hearing, the chair pointed out that we need to review the special district regulations and the LDGMA regulations. There's the special district under section 107-322 has an on-site tree planting requirement in addition to street trees for enlargements within the special district that create an additional 1,000 square feet of floor area, which would result in requiring 28 trees to be planted on site, we believe that number is excessive in that the programmatic needs of where the building needs to be makes that impractical, especially in consideration of the fact that the northern lot line, anything that would be planted there would be largely obstructed from sunlight and would not be able to grow. So we are requesting a waiver of that particular requirement.
But we've never seen any as of right showing compliance with that. I don't believe.
The as of right submitted here, which I understand from the comments of the chair before, still require revisions based on, may require revisions based on what the as of right building is. Show what 23 trees might would look like on site and where they'd have to be situated.
It does show that, you're saying. And so you would need to demonstrate, I don't know what the tree planting requirement is. Why are you thinking that the other trees don't qualify?
It's not that the other trees don't qualify. It's the 28 tree requirement and having 28 on site. The as of right.
Sorry, I don't know if you looked at the plans. The plans actually show, I forget what the number is, 12 regular trees and 14, or say 14 regular trees and 14 arborvitae. Why doesn't the 14 arborvitae count? You have to look at your own drawings.
Yeah, so the arborvitae that are proposed, the special district contains an appendix with a list of trees that are that are separate from the standard district list for the special district.
So why
And
can't
so-
those trees be provided? What's the spacing? What's the requirement? You got to get into more than this than just say you can't.
Yeah, and as soon as just go through some of the preliminary issues, I think the architect who's on can discuss these in depth.
I mean, you know, some of it is this insistence on building all the way out to the front yard line, for example, with no trees at all on the Sampson Street frontage, nothing. And the insistence on building that little kind of appendage thing on the Lamoka side, therefore building into potentially where there might be planting, where we talked about how there might be other ways of laying this out. Whoa, sorry. So, you know, this idea that there's no room seems to be driven by the design that doesn't allow for any room. And there's also, yeah, it just seems like there's so many different places where you could potentially put planting and you haven't done it. So.
Yeah, and with respect to the design itself and the siding of the building, the architect and pastor are here to talk about this. We did look at the board's suggestions about reconfiguring the sanctuary and some of the spaces, but the programmatic needs of how the sanctuary in particular needs to be designed and the church's need to be able to preserve the features of the existing building necessitate this layout and don't allow us to shift things on the portion that's not in Lamoka Avenue.
I have a question, if I could just.
Yeah.
Even if you were to take that and accept it, when you look at your tree planting on your proposed, you're putting shrubs where in your as of right, you actually have trees. So if you were to fill in those shrubs with trees like the as of right, then you could certainly fit more trees.
Yeah, in total, we'd end up, I think, with fewer plants. And with this, the essence of the arborvitae that's shown, section 107.323 provides for a city planning commission authorization.
But you're just getting a city planning authorization. You're asking us to waive the regulation. So ignore that. You're asking us to give you a variance against trees in a residential district, and where we're asking you to be more respectful of the fact that this is a residential street that you're fronting or backing up to, right? So I'm sorry, I'm really not buying this because you haven't given us any I see Mr. Comis's or Pastor Comis's hand up. Just one second. You're not giving us any like support for why you can't do this. And I'm just looking at the tree requirements. Section 107.322 says, new trees shall be provided in accordance with the table set forth in Appendix B. For any existing tree of at least 6-inch caliber, which is preserved, so credit for one tree shall be given for the first 6 inches of caliper. So if you have an old tree, you get some credit. I don't know if you have any old trees. And for each additional 4 inches of credit, you get caliper for an additional tree. I mean, you get credit for an additional tree. I don't know if you have any trees, but did they take into account the existing trees? Are you removing existing trees? What's the situation there? On site in connection with any development, site alteration or enlargement, which is you, involving the addition of at least 1,000 square feet of floor area, which is used, trees of at least 3-inch caliber, pre-existing or new planted, shall be provided on the zoning lot at the rate of 1 tree for each 1,000 square feet of lot area or portion thereof. So that's where you come up with 28 trees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so, and then it says planting for open parking areas, which you have. And that only applies to developments, right? So it says any development with an open off-street parking area with 10 spaces or more shall be subject to the tree planting and screening requirements of section 107.483. So So you need to establish why you can't meet this and what kind of, I don't understand why. So if the Appendix B doesn't provide for arborvitae, maybe it provides for other trees, because it doesn't seem, Appendix B, it doesn't seem as if there's any restriction on how it's laid out, but maybe there is a restriction on how it's laid out.
Jeff, do you want to speak to this?
Yes. This is Jeff Parker. Some of the constraints that we have with the 28 trees is when the trees get mature, they get big and bushy. And so if we start out on the south property line that's along the railway has like a heavily vegetated wooded area that goes right up to our property line, and it actually hangs over it significantly. And so with the gap that we have there, which is on the north side of all of those trees, we don't have an opportunity to put trees there where they would have a chance to do well, because they're in the shadow of those large trees. And so we were suggesting these smaller trees, because they don't get as tall and widespread, but what they do is they provide a visual barrier that goes up maybe 10 feet or so, and it would grow along the edge and underneath the large.
Sorry, are you a landscape architect?
No.
Did you work with a landscape architect?
No.
Okay, so I say this to all the architects. Landscape architecture, I know, because I also am an architect who was asked to do landscape architecture, and almost all my trees died on the site. So there's a reason why there are landscape architects. You give them the job of laying this out to comply with the regulations, and you see what they suggest. Because you're just using your little CAD button that drops a lot of circles in there with little shapes in them. And you're saying I'm complying or I'm not complying. And I think I know what an arborvitae does when it's growing, but you don't. You need to work with a landscape architect. I'm sorry, because it can't be the excuse that I'm sure there's a way to get more vegetation on this site. And I'm sure there's a way to get, at the very least, much closer to it. And I'm not persuaded, based on your argument, that you're going to get a 10-foot arborvitae to grow underneath a tree canopy that already exists. So, so you need to work with a professional on this subject. And then in addition to which, behind the building, there's all of this, there's this whole area that's just paved over. So, or grass, why isn't that planted? Not in the front of the building on Sampson. So there's lots of opportunity. A landscape architect would have a great time with this, and they should be hired. Okay. All right, let's move on, because I'm not persuaded that you were entitled to a waiver for programmatic reasons on this site.
Okay, the other thing that I wanted to touch on before speaking specifically about the programmatic needs in the worship space, I'm sure you commented during the review session that these waivers can be brought under 7201G, utilizing the previous variance. Our understanding of how DOB interprets these provisions is that because this variance lapsed when it wasn't renewed, the building is not lawfully non-conforming. And therefore—
Did you get a ZRD1 on that?
We did not.
So how do you know? Because that's not been our experience. The building exists, right? It exists, and the bulk pre-exists a certain time period, and it was built legally. And if you look at the language in whatever language, whichever place that is, about how it becomes legal non-conforming, at the time of its construction, it was legal, both the use and the the bulk were legal. And then so therefore that's the definition of legal non-conforming, and you're entitled to convert a legal non-conforming building into, or non-complying, well, actually in both complying and conforming, you're entitled to convert it to a conforming use without respect to the bulk regulations. So without a ZRD1 to tell me that the DOB has shifted its position, I'll ask. We would like you, I don't think that you're correct. I have a request that if it's possible for you to turn your video on and we're not looking at your still image, we'd appreciate it.
It's 1:38,
Yeah, I'm looking.
Right.
Thank you. Nope. All right. So please continue.
And so with that, I would turn it to the project architect, Jeffrey Parker, to speak a little bit more about the programmatic needs for the design.
So
And
you understand that you should get a ZRD1 if you really think that's an issue, right?
understood, yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Parker.
Okay. What we did is we worked, our specialty is in working with churches similar to Faith. And so what we did is developed the design based on their needs. Pastor Gary characterized those programming needs in what was submitted to you as part of that package, and included some pictures and so forth. But as a whole, they've been making do, but yet growing, worshiping in a movie theater right now, and that tides them over on Sundays, and then they rent office space, which takes care of their midweek activities and offices. And they're moving to this location to try to bring it all together, plus to give them an opportunity to grow and do a better job with ministry, where they're not having to pack up and set up all the time at the movie theater in a makeshift setting. So what they need to give them space to grow is about 240 seats. That's what we have proposed in the floor plan that we gave you. And the type of sanctuary that they need is one that is not like a traditional sanctuary where the aisles are long and the pews are narrow, but rather that the people all feel close into the platform, and it's more of a wraparound sense of family or intimacy where people can feel more connected to the platform. The existing building, it's important to work with the existing building because it's not practical to tear it down and just start over. And so to try to work with the existing building and take that one block of space that seats 240 and look at the various areas where that can be located. The area that we've shown it is really the only practical place that you can do that. We did, after a meeting the last time, go back and explore other options, particularly where we didn't match the existing front wall that's on Sampson if we kept it stepped back. But we would either lose seats doing that way, or it would push the wall that separates the sanctuary from the remainder of their building. It would push that over, and then there's not enough space for all of their other needs for kids, for the nursery, to have that multi-meeting room where they can also have coffee and cookies together where they can get to know each other better. And so it didn't work to do that. So where we're showing the sanctuary right now, we would actually eliminate a bearing wall of the existing building for the length of the sanctuary and replace that with a beam to open that up and absorb that part of the building into the sanctuary. And then just to further elaborate, the way the building is set up right now, that's a firewall that separates the sanctuary room from all other parts of the building, which splits it into two different fire compartments, each one that would have less than 300 occupants. And so we feel that we're planning to design all of this to be compliant with the new building code, not the current building code, I should say, and not rely on existing building codes. But we would split it up into areas that have fewer than 300 occupants. And we do not intend to sprinkle it as a result of that. And then secondly, there's an existing mezzanine level or second floor that's above a small portion of the southwest corner of the building. And that's an existing floor level that's up there, and it's quite small. I can't remember the square footage right offhand, but the square footage is small, and being that it's less than 3,000 square feet, we would not be required to service that with an elevator.
Wait a second. You said you're complying with 2014 code.
Yeah.
But so how do you justify, never mind even the code, how do you justify guaranteeing that no one in your administration can be disabled in any way? I mean, we're talking about just walking up the stairs, someone who has a broken ankle or is elderly. I'm not just talking about wheelchair bound, someone who really has trouble getting up the stairs. You're basically saying that nobody in administration can be disabled at any time in their lives.
Well, they have the grouping. We have the grouping of offices up there because that's the way it was even originally built. Right now it's subdivided into offices. And I imagine they did that back when this was built.
No,
because
no. You forget about that. That's for a plumbing workshop that was built before there was, I think, even local law 58, because I think it's pre-88, that building. You can't rely on that. If you're saying you're bringing this up to 2014 code, bringing it up to 2014 code, but also you're here before us and we do not allow buildings that are not ADA accessible. So you have to provide a lula, something to get up to that floor. But the other thing that I wanted to ask is, why can't you put some of your programming upstairs and enlarge slightly that mezzanine area? It still fits within your entire bulk. Like, you don't need the ceiling height that you have over the sanctuary and the lobby. You don't need that over the children's programming room, for example, and the nursery and that little hallway and so on. Why don't you expand the mezzanine to put some of the programming there so that you don't have as much lot coverage, and then you can meet the planting requirements?
Those rooms, we actually intend to have a higher ceiling height. The space beneath the mezzanine right now is real low, and to match that would make all these rooms to be quite low. And we're planning on, for the type of programming and activities they have, to have about a 10-foot ceiling height in these rooms. And we're just making do in here, like with bathrooms and the nursery. spaces that don't need a lot of space to tuck it in where ceiling height is so short, or is so minimal.
What is the ceiling height below the mezzanine?
I think it's below the mezzanine, it's below the structure, it's like a little under 9 feet. And then when you put the ductwork and wiring and all that stuff in there, it's just barely able to be 8.
And why is that too low to be a children's? I'm just looking at that. Why is that too low to be nursery, children's programming, children's program? Yeah. Why is that too low?
I think what we'll do is let Pastor Gary comment on how he uses some of these spaces, because then you're talking directly to the person.
Well, I think, Mr. Parker, I have faith in your expertise. I think that you could work out you can work out the space with and the programmatic needs of this client within a structure that is responsive to the community board, is compliant with ADA regulations. I think you can do that. And I also think that you can. I think that access on Sampson is something that you should revisit. I believe that I think you've heard much of that during our review session. I believe you have the expertise to make it so that the programmatic needs of this institution are met in a different layout.
Right. I mean, and I think what maybe, and I see Commissioner Shanda's hand up, what is driving my questions is your inability to provide on-site landscaping in any way that's responsive to the community and the zoning resolution. And I don't see how programmatic needs are driving that. Plus you have this parking, this driveway going through the entire site, which you don't need. And so you could get rid of the driveway going through the entire site and add trees there. Or this could be a very nicely planted, lush frontage on Sampson, and instead it's being treated like a commercial place, like a shopping mall, frankly, or a strip mall. And that's not what this is, a house of worship, and it's supposed to read to the community as a place of importance and grandeur and pride. So Commissioner Shanda, or Vice Chair Shanda.
Thank you. I think it will also be helpful in the proposed plan if you can provide the footprint of the existing building, because when I look at the existing building and the footprint and the height of the existing building, it seems you're maintaining the same height that which is 18 feet, 18 inches, which is in the, I'm looking at the existing plan. It says 18 feet, 18 inches to the height of the parapet wall, and which is what you're showing for your classrooms and everything that's there. So maybe that's why you have that 18 feet, 8 inches. You're keeping the existing building and trying to work with as much of the existing building. And I can understand that you're a nonprofit organization. You're trying to work with limited financing and that you're trying to use the existing building and maximize it. But that still doesn't take away the fact that you have to meet what the current regulations are that would apply to this building. And I think the places where you are enlarging, maybe do it in a way where you can accommodate the street trees on site as much as possible and have the building blend, be more respectful of the residential character that is there along Sampson Avenue. That's really what I would say. And I'm okay with the little amount of office space that you've laid out, unless you want to put another level, but then you have to provide, I understand you want to limit all your public functioning on the same floor and limit just the office related uses upstairs so that you minimize, keep the separation of the admin and the public space separate. But if you have to provide parking, elevator for that office space above, then you have to. I don't see an out on that one. Yeah, that's where I stand.
Okay, thank you. I saw the pastor's hand up, Pastor Gomez's hand up. Would you like to speak? Go ahead, unmute yourself, sir. Go ahead. Or maybe he's frozen. I think Pastor Comus is frozen, or unless it's me. Can
No,
everyone hear me?
he's frozen. Unmute yourself, sir.
You're muted.
You're muted. We can't hear you. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, my internet just crashed. Forgive me. I wanted to say just briefly, just to give you an idea of, obviously what we're trying to do. We're trying to comply with everything that we need to comply with in order to enhance the community and the character of the community. The last thing we want, it is really antithetical to a church to disrespect the community. If that's the last thing we want. We don't want anybody within our community to be upset with us as pertaining to parking or the way the building looks. We're trying to do our best with.
Yeah, you're frozen. But while he's frozen, what I want to say is we have 2 minutes left on, 7 minutes left on this morning hearing. So what I would like to do is instruct people who are on the morning hearing to dial into the afternoon hearing that begins at 2 p.m. and then we can continue this one. So if you would take down, I'm going to give you the dial-in information for the afternoon.
You need it? You have it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have it in, of course. So please write this down. The dial-in information is the same as it was before. It's 646-558-8656. This is to anybody also in the attendee room who might have wanted to speak on this item. So that number, and then the meeting ID for the 2 p.m. session is the following, which you should write down. It's 937-3964-1835. So you're going to be calling in a few minutes. We're going to have to end this session and start up the 2 p.m. Session with a different dial-in number. Okay, everyone got that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, did I leave anything out, Kurt?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good. All right, so please continue, but we only have 5 minutes and you're gonna get.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to see, is there a meeting password for the 2 p.m. dial-in?
That's what I just gave you, the meeting ID number.
Yeah, but is there additionally a passcode that we need?
So when you dial that number, the 646-558-8656, it will give you the prompt to, and then you dial in the 937-3964-1835. And if you were to go on, and Steve, stop me if it's not working, but if you were to go on to the BSA Zoom site, which is, where is the BSA Zoom site? Which is
I think there is a passcode.
Yeah,
It's 9.
no, I see it, but I don't think they need it. But the BSA, let me
Okay.
like that. So there's a BSA Zoom site that's so exciting, which seems to be public facing. And Kurt is now displaying the information. Normally we do it with a link, right? So you can also click on the link on our calendar.
That's yesterday's, Kurtz. That's yesterday's. We need the 25th.
Yeah, that's yesterday, sorry. But you can also click on the link on the calendar, but not everyone has access to that calendar link, right? But I want to just say, if you go to bsa-nyc.zoom.us, you will see our cover page for video conferencing. When you hit the join button, it asks for the meeting ID that I gave you, the 937-3964-1835, and then you'll register again the same way you did earlier. We'll have the registration requirements, okay? Does everyone have that?
All right, so we got 4 minutes.
Okay, so I think maybe it's easier if, I just want to make sure that everyone who's listening has that information. Otherwise, I think it's just easier if we sign off now because we're going to get interrupted.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right, Mr. Rosenberg, you got it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we'll sign off now. Please dial back into the 2 p.m. session the way we just instructed you. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody do that. Staff also, obviously.